But Yeon-woo was not so happy. The guy came to the window. He was all in his thoughts. Meanwhile, the girls were discussing what had happened to Kim Min-ju. Seo-young was crying because she was still painfully experiencing the loss of her friend. Jeonwoo was eavesdropping on their conversation. Soyon said that everything seemed too unrealistic and cruel to her. The teenager suddenly remembered his friend Kim Jubin. Yeonwoo also could not get over the loss and is unlikely to ever do so. Jubin was always so weird and strange. But that's why they were friends, because they accepted all the cockroaches in each other. Yeonwoo imagined his friend standing next to him, wishing so much that Jubin was here now, rejoicing that this nightmare was over. Suddenly someone called Yeonva. It was Kiju who stood there apologizing to the boy. The teenager did not understand at first. Then Kiju explained that he thought Yeonwoo was angry because they wouldn't open the door for them. After that, the guy looked out the window and apologized again, as if for all his friends. He explained that they had barely found this safe place themselves, so they were afraid of being noticed. Yeonwoo interrupted Kiju and told him not to worry because the teenager had survived on the streets on his own, so he was no stranger to it. The guy admired Yeonwoo and said that he would never have been able to survive on his own. The girls overheard their conversation from behind. The lipped classmate perked up her ears, as if she didn't like it. Then she interrupted the guys and said that was enough. They didn't understand what was happening. So a classmate told Kid that they needed to talk and he had to follow her. The guy said goodbye to Jeonwoo and promised to talk to him again. A lip-syncing classmate caught this phrase as well. Meanwhile, the girls asked Soyon if she had been in that chat, but it was clear from her reaction that she had not. A classmate started screaming and said that something terrible and disgusting had happened and that it was all Hannah's fault. The girl said she took a photo of Hanmi falling. Soyeon was shocked and returned to find Hannah, but my classmate was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the dark room below. Someone could be heard crying on the stairs. It was Kang Hana, crying and saying how much she hated her classmate. She was shaking, curled up in a ball. She could see the displeased face of her classmate, who was condemning Hannah. The girl cried bitterly and did not understand why they all did this to her. It made her fiercely angry. And then, Hannah remembered Hanmi. She was her close friend, so she was also upset. Hannah did not mean Hanma any harm. Meanwhile, the events moved to the kitchen. At the bottom of the table were cans of oil. Kang Ji-hoon was rummaging around and looking for something. He raked up everything he saw in front of him and wondered what else he could take with him. A classmate in a purple suit approached him and asked what he was doing here. She added that there was not much variety in the food. Kang Ji-hoon turned to her and looked down at her, threatening her not to annoy him. But the girl just calmly drank some water and said that she could not be intimidated that easily. And then she just turned around and left. But Kang Ji-hoon stopped her. The guy asked where the soju was. He was sure that the girl must have known about it. My classmate stopped. She was interested in Kang Ji-hoon's question. Then she opened her briefcase and started looking for something. Then the girl took out a bottle of alcohol and asked if that was what Kang Ji-hoon meant. The guy was shocked that his classmate was carrying alcohol in her briefcase. It turned out that there was more than one bottle. Kang Ji-hoon asked why she was carrying them in her bag. She said that these were all the bottles of soju she found in Park Min's briefcase. And then, the girl asked if these were all the bottles they used for the raffle. Kang Ji-hoon confirmed this information. Then, the girl became animated and asked the boy if he drank them to stay awake, and then asked him to teach her how to do the same. But Kang Ji-hoon asked her not to disturb him. But his classmate stood her ground and said that they were her bottles. So Kang Ji-hoon had to tell her who taught him how to do it. The teenager said briefly that it was an acquaintance, but the girl wanted to know more. Then Kang Ji-hoon remembered his friend Jihan Hyun, who had passed away. The teenager said again that it was an acquaintance. He did not want to talk about it because the wound was too fresh. Meanwhile, the soldier who came with them ordered everyone to get ready because they had to leave before sunset. Jeonwoo suddenly felt something strange. He was again visited by that strange feeling in his hand that spread throughout his body. Soyon, meanwhile, was alarmed and screaming. Of course, the soldier noticed this and asked what happened. His face showed that he cared about Soyon and was happy to help. The girl came back and said that one was missing. She was talking about Kang Hana and added that it seemed that her classmate had gone somewhere. This was not the kind of help the military wanted to provide, so he was shocked. He started a search engine and told everyone to find it because they were about to leave. So-young noticed Yeonwoo standing sadly by the window. The guy said that it didn't look like he was burning alive when Soyon approached him. The girl did not understand what the teenager was talking about. Yeonwoo didn't know how to put the words together without sounding strange coming from him. Meanwhile, Hannah was still sitting on the stairs. She got to her feet. The girl seemed to see something in front of her that frightened her. Yeonwoo said Soyon that it seemed that the monster Gale was still alive. It turned out that it was he who was standing in front of Kang Han. The girl was in a stupor because she was one step away from death. She screamed loudly, which was all Hannah could do at that moment. Meanwhile, the events moved to the shopping center where the company was located. The soldier and Kang Ji-hoon loudly recoiled and hid behind the wall. They looked around. Her husband said she wasn't there. It turned out they were looking for Kang Hannah. A classmate said she was there. Soyon was also worried about her friend, even though she was doing bad things. The soldier said they had no choice but to go without her. Then Yeonwoo came to them and also confirmed that his search was in vain because he had not found Hannah. The soldier then said that everyone should wait for him, and he would go to the basement to look for him. After that, he turned to everyone and told them not to worry too much, and then called out Soyeon's name. The girl was confused and did not know how to react and what to say in such cases. Then a loud-mouthed classmate yelled at everyone and told them to act quickly to get out of here. But someone interrupted her. She didn't have time to finish her humiliation about Hannah. It was Kang Ji-hoon, and he asked if his classmate was sure. He came back and asked if Kang Hannah's picture on the phone was definitely of Hanmi, but her classmate asked her if she had ever cheated on them. Ji-hoon asked her to answer normally. The soldier interrupted them and said that there was enough talk, they had to go. Then he called Jonah. The guy was even glad to be noticed, but lately he'd been getting too much attention from the military. The events moved to the basement. Yeonwoo and the man hid behind the door and carefully examined the room to make sure there were no monsters. Then the guy noticed the eggs and told the soldier to be careful. Yeonwoo asked if they had been here since the beginning of the virus. After that, the soldier asked him if he was afraid. Yeonwoo was puzzled by this question, so he asked the man again. The soldier came back and said that the boy agreed to go with him without argument. Yeonwoo said it wasn't like that. The man was just helping them, so the boy was grateful to him. A strange smile appeared on the soldier's face, indicating a lack of understanding. Then he laughed and said that Yeonwoo was funny, and then advised him to watch out. Otherwise, he would be finished. The man seemed to want to know something from the boy, so he asked why Yeonwoo wasn't afraid of her eggs, to which the boy replied that he was just dealing with them. And then, the teenager's tone became quieter and sadder, and he said that he just wanted to save his friend. The soldier laughed again and said that although the probability was not high, he thought that their friend had died long ago. The man did not even return to Yeonwoo, saying that he wanted to be honest with him. He added that only the strongest survived, and the boy had to understand that. But Yeonwoo did not fully understand the meaning of the man's words, so he asked him again, to which the soldier turned and said Soyeon's name. Then the teenager got nervous and asked what she was doing here. That strange smile reappeared on the man's face, and he looked the boy straight in the eye. Then he asked if Yeonwoo liked her, to which the guy reacted with a strong shock. The teenager looked down and said that it was not even close. Then the soldier asked why the boy blushed. Yeonwoo shouted that it was just hot. He suddenly remembered her, how beautiful she had been at the beginning of the tour. Soyoung was Yeonwoo's first love. Now he wasn't sure if he wanted to date her again. The teenager realized that he had been deceiving himself, that he did not like Soyeon, and then asked the soldier not to ask such strange questions anymore. A lot has changed now. The man said he understood the boy. Then he turned away and looked down, as if he was still worried about something. The soldier looked at Yeonwoo again and asked him again if he would answer his question. Yeonwoo looked into the man's eyes and realized that his behavior was strange and at times dangerous. The soldier's eyes narrowed, as if he were angry, and the man said that Soyoung liked Yeonwoo. The guy didn't know how to react, but he knew he had to speak carefully. Suddenly, someone else approached them. It was Kang Ji-hoon, who said he thought they were looking for Hannah, not talking. The soldier asked him why he had come. The guy looked down at his forehead and said that they were waiting too long. And then he added that he had found another staircase upstairs. Meanwhile, the events moved upstairs, where everyone else was. The girls looked at what was happening outside. They noticed that the Kan River was full of these eggs, which had grown to incredible sizes. Her classmate was more outraged than anyone else, and asked when they managed to get so big. Soyeon thought she didn't understand anything. She wondered why the authorities suddenly stopped taking people out. After all, they could have evacuated everyone and burned everything. Or did they just want to leave everything as it was and start acting? Meanwhile, Another classmate asked what Hannah was like in middle school. The lipped girl began a story about what high school was like for her. There were only boys in her class back then, and they stole Hannah's personal diary. When she found out about it, she was furious. In fact, she can be understood because it is her personal diary. They had no right. My classmate said that there were strange and horrible things written in that diary. Hannah wanted someone to push her down the stairs or to drink poisoned milk. The girls were shocked by this information. A loud-mouthed classmate said that because of this, Kang Hana became friends with Homie, perhaps trying to live a normal life. Then, she asked if Hannah was weird and commented that she was trying to make a victim out of herself. But suddenly their conversation was interrupted by screams. It was Kiju, who was out of breath and running to the girls and looking around. It turned out that the boy had seen a monster and was running away from it. They all hid behind the wall and panicked because they didn't know what to do next. Then a girl in a purple suit told everyone to wait and reached into her briefcase. She then pulled out a Molotov cocktail. Soyon knew what it was and said it was supposed to help because the monsters were afraid of fire. The girls started to say that they didn't have a lighter, but another classmate was already lighting the cocktail. Soyon did not know everything about her classmates. A few minutes later, the monster was already on fire. My other classmates screamed and complained about the terrible smell. Other monsters came running to these sounds. The company heard this and realized that they had to leave immediately. The monsters ran after them. A classmate took out her phone while running. It seemed she wanted to call for help. Meanwhile, the boys continued to search for Kang Han. They went down to the floor below. It was called 2F, and for some reason was marked with a special color. The guys entered the room through a glass door. The soldier said there was nothing there. Everything really looked clean. Yeon-woo said to be careful, and Kang Ji-hoon looked out from behind him to see what he was doing. Then they went down the stairs even further. At that moment, Jeon-woo felt a sharp pain in his arm. The guy decided to look up, but there was nothing there. The room was surprisingly clean, and that was what scared me. Then he looked at what was happening on the street. It seems that the teenager has noticed something. Behind the glass, he saw a large number of monsters. Kang Ji-hoon also noticed them and was aggressive. When they entered another door, they were met by monsters. One of them immediately spotted his victims and headed for them. Meanwhile, Kang Hana held onto the door with her hands and yelled for them to leave. There were monsters outside the door and the girl was trying to escape. Kang Hana shouted to the monsters and thought they understood her. The girl was shaking with fear. The monster even seemed to answer her. Hannah tried to remind Gale of herself, but the zombie didn't want to listen to her and slipped through the crack in the door. Her paws were very close to Kang Hana's. The girl quickly took her hands away and screamed. She stood in a stupor and just screamed for Gale to leave her. The monster tried to get out of the door because it was pinned when Hannah let go. When the mucus that was used as skin receded from the body, the skeleton of the monster was visible. It looked very scary. The boys heard Hannah and ran to her. Kang Ji-hoon did not understand how the monster got here because they were not supposed to be here. Gale noticed the boys right away and found new victims. Kang Ji-hoon immediately threw a Molotov cocktail at her before she could attack first. Gale growled. The soldier readied his weapon and aimed at the monster. But something strange was happening to the monster. Its skin began to melt. The guys were shocked by what they saw. The monster simply took its head away from the fire, sacrificing part of its slime skin. It did not burn any further, although other monsters were afraid of fire, but Gale was not. The guys opened their mouths wide and could not believe what they were seeing. The monster simply put out all the fire with himself. Gale was smarter than the other monsters. After that, she just ran away from them. The soldier pointed his weapon and said that she had to be destroyed. He ordered the other guys to run away immediately. Then the monster stopped and turned to them. She changed her route and decided to attack the boys. The teenagers were scared and screamed. The monster screamed even louder. Yeon-woo covered his ears with his hands. He felt sick for some reason. The men fled to a safe place. They stood there and recoiled, not realizing what was happening. When others discussed that the monsters had learned to regenerate, Yeon-woo was in his own thoughts. Suddenly he realized something shocking, and then his arm got sore again. The phrase about the regeneration of monsters puzzled him. Yeon-woo also noticed something strange when the military pointed their weapons at him. He was shocked because it seems that monsters have become smarter. Meanwhile, Jeon-woo looked around and realized that they were not alone. Behind the glass, Kang Hana was shaking. She stood and said how glad she was that they had come for her. Kang Ji-hoon approached the glass and asked if Hannah had asked them for help, and asked if the girl had a conscience. Hannah started to say that it was all because of Seo-young, because she was close to Park Min and asked her not to help him. She swore that she really wanted to help. It looks like she was lying. After all, if Seo-young was close to Park Min, she would have been in the chat room as well. Then Kang Ji-hoon asked what happened to Hunmi. He asked why Hannah had taken her picture and then suggested that she could have done the same to Soyon. Kang Hana began to stutter. She was nervous and didn't know what to say. Kang Ji-hoon noticed that the soldier was pointing a rifle at her. He asked the man what was going on. The soldier ordered the girl to stay where she was. He threatened to shoot Hannah if she came out. Kang Ji-hoon was outraged and shouted at the soldier because his actions were strange. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo noticed something. He began to look closely and examine everything. Kang Ji-hoon and the soldier continued to argue. The guy asked why he was aiming if they had come to save her. The soldier asked what Kang Ji-hoon was doing now. He said directly that they had to save Hannah before she came into contact with the monster. The soldier said they did not know whether the girl was infected or not. Otherwise, they risked losing everyone. He added that the safety of the majority came first. Kang Ji-hoon did not like these words. Hannah started screaming and proving that she was not infected. The girl suddenly began to tell the truth. She said that what happened to Hunmi was her fault. Hannah said she was sorry for what she had done and that she had also sent the photo to get help. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo was looking at the girl, as if he could see right through her. And he noticed something in her hands. He agreed with the military that they did not know for sure whether the girl was infected. Then Yeon-woo said that Hannah had touched the monster. He thought that he should have accepted it. Hannah stood in a stupor and did not understand anything. She tried to shout and challenge Yeon-woo's words but was interrupted. The boy said he saw the monster touch her. He didn't actually see it, but he had to protect everyone somehow. He added that when Hannah tried to close the door, the monster touched her. The boy realized that this was the only way to save the others. Yeon-woo said they could not take the girl with them. Hannah started screaming and crying for them to believe her. Kang Ji-hoon yelled at the guy and asked him when he had seen her. Then, the soldier also asked Yeon-woo if he was sure of his words. The man said that if it was true, they had to get rid of her. Yeon-woo looked down and said he was completely sure of it. He turned around and said that they had to leave her here and leave, because it was dangerous to stay here. Suddenly, he heard a loud sound behind him. Yeon-woo turned around and saw a horrific scene. He could not believe his eyes and what had happened. Kan Hannah was lying on the floor with a lot of broken glass near her. Kang Ji-hoon ran at the soldier, called him a scumbag and asked him to stop. The man asked if the boy was serious. A conflict was brewing between them. Kang Ji-hoon looked at him with great aggression. The soldier said that the teenager spoke directly. He explained that it was better to die from a bullet than to be infected. Yeon-woo kept looking at Kang Hannah in shock. His eyes widened. He was scared, just like the time a homeless man was shot in front of him. The soldier pushed Kang Ji-hoon and ordered him not to stand still because he had to leave. Suddenly, the man heard something strange. There was a monster in the doorway running at them. The man started to run away. Kang Hannah was still lying there, dripping with fluid. Suddenly, her eyes opened and she wished for Yeon-woo's death. Meanwhile, the boys were climbing up the stairs. They were laughing loudly when the man noticed something. The room where the others were supposed to wait was completely on fire. The man started shouting and calling everyone to come out. The soldier moved forward, giving the others the opportunity to be alone. There was a lot of tension between the guys. Kang Ji-hoon called out to Yeon-woo. He grabbed the boy by his t-shirt and called him a bastard, saying that no matter how strong he was, Yeon-woo was acting like a monster. Kang Ji-hoon asked if he was even a human being, because Yeon-woo did the same thing to Park Min. Maybe he liked killing others. Yeon-woo simply pulled away rudely and ordered him to let go. The teenager explained that Kang Hannah was infected and he could not keep silent about it. Kang Ji-hoon started screaming and asked him not to lie because Yeon-woo couldn't see anything. He couldn't decide who was infected and who wasn't. The teenager called Yeonwoo a murderer. Then, a military man interrupted the conversation and said that it was not the time for talks. Others were running behind the company. They shouted and rejoiced that they had finally found the boys. Soyon noticed something strange going on between the boys. Yeon-woo told Kang Ji-hoon that it didn't solve anything, that he looked like a monster. The teenager looked at him with surprise, even fear. Yeon-woo said calmly that Kang Ji-hoon already knew everything, and he asked how long the boy would pretend that he didn't understand. Meanwhile, Kang Hannah was still in the basement. She whined that she was hurt. Suddenly the girl noticed something. In front of her was Gale, who was yelling at Hannah, as if she didn't feel the virus in her. Suddenly, Hannah felt something strange in herself. Her hand trembled and eventually her whole body. Gale threw her tentacles at Kang Hana. The monster opened its huge mouth and roared. Kang Hana's face was covered with blisters, as if Gale was devouring the girl. Hana told the monster to eat everyone else. Meanwhile, tensions between Yeonwoo and Kang Ji-hoon were growing. Kang Ji-hoon asked him what he knew, and his eyes showed fear. The teenager was afraid of what he knew. At that moment, others ran up to them. Yeon-woo said that everyone here was in great danger, and then he added that Kang Ji-hoon could have pretended to know nothing, and then suggested that we end it there. But the guy's patience ran out and he exploded. Kang Ji-hoon grabbed Yeon-woo's shirt again and came at him with accusations that he couldn't see that Hana was infected. Ki-ju intervened in the fight and began to break it up. The other girls asked where Kang Hana was. Soyon began to worry and guess something and asked where her classmate was. Yeon-woo looked at the girl with a cold and glassy gaze. Soyon began to get even more nervous. Her questions seemed rhetorical, because it was already clear what had happened. The soldier began to say that he was sorry. He returned to Soyon and said that Hana was infected and they had no other choice. Kang Ji-hoon exploded and asked him to tell the truth. The teenager turned to everyone and said that Hana was not infected. They just took her life, and it was all because of Yeonwoo. Ki-ju asked the boy to explain everything. The soldier shouted and ordered Kang Ji-hoon to close up because everything was clear. The man said that Kang Hana was in close contact with one of the animals, and Yeonwoo saw it. The others looked at the boys with suspicion. Then the soldier asked which of them wanted to walk next to the time bomb. Ki-ju turned to the man and asked if it was true. He could not believe what had happened, and could not say the word. Yeonwoo was silent and looked at the floor. The teenager understood how it sounded, but the lives of the majority were the priority. Ki-ju's eyes widened, and he looked at the teenager with fear. Then, a loud-mouthed classmate ended the conversation and said that they had to run away, and added that she did not miss Hana. Kang Ji-hoon asked that even if the girl was just expressing her opinion, did Hana deserve such a fate? Then her classmate attacked her with accusations that she was already infected, so she would have died sooner or later. Kang Ji-hoon continued to argue that this was not the case, when suddenly, Yeonwoo felt something. He turned back to see what made him feel pain and was horrified. A monster came out of the room behind them. He was not yet visible, but Yeonwoo could still feel it. He ordered the others to run away. The teenager could even hear the monster growling. Yeonwoo ordered everyone to flee once again, but this time louder. But everyone was in a stupor and did not understand why they had to run away. So the teenager shouted in an unnatural voice that they should run away immediately. At the time, they listened to him, but Kang Ji-hoon began to resent why they had to listen to him. But the teenager didn't have time to finish because he saw something. The monster Gale, who was very close to the company, came out of the stairs. Everyone started running away as fast as they could and didn't look back. The newcomers were lagging behind because it was their first experience. The soldier shouted that they needed fire. A classmate with dark hair was far behind the others. She stopped to rest, but there was a monster behind her. Gale screamed at the girl. Death was inevitable. This was noticed by another classmate in a tracksuit. The poor woman was shaking and started crying because she realized what was about to happen. She noticed that next to the monster's face was another, completely fresh one. It resembled Hana's face. Then her classmate screamed even louder because she saw her future. Suddenly, a friend ran to her rescue with a cocktail. She threw it at the monster. Gale screamed. Her skin began to melt. Unfortunately, her classmate was already infected because the monster had already eaten her. Then, Park Choa wanted to light another cocktail to save her friend, but was stopped by Yeonwoo. He dragged the girl away, saying that there was no point in setting this monster on fire because it was putting out the fire. Even though Gale was melting down and busy with her sacrifice, it was still dangerous. The teenagers ran on. Yeonwoo turned back to see what was happening. He seemed to feel the monster's emotions and compassion. The first to run was a soldier and Soyon. The man complained that this madness had started again. There was a big pile of monsters in front of them, and the man said there was no point in saving anyone. A monster suddenly appeared near Soyon, as if out of nowhere, but the soldier was able to stand up for her and opened fire on the monster. The man shouted that they could not be stopped with weapons. They needed fire. Ki-ju saw what happened to the others and started looking around for a fire. He noticed an object that was on fire. At that moment, another monster attacked him. Ki-ju grabbed the burning object and managed to fight off the monster. The boy acted confidently and bravely. Then he heard his girlfriend screaming. The lipped girl, Seon-young, was also attacked by a monster. She screamed loudly and stood in a stupor. Ki-ju bravely stood up for her. pushed her away, and threw the burning object at the monster. It worked, and the monster fell to the ground. Kiju did not even have time to realize what was happening. The teenager was acting on automatic. He turned to Seon-young and asked if she was okay. And then, when I helped her up, she even thanked me for saving her. Kiju shouted that they had to leave because it was extremely dangerous to stay. And at that moment, the monster attacked him with its tentacles. Sung-yeon quickly started running away when she saw this. Monster Gale and Hannah pounced on poor Kiju and laughed at his expression. It was the first time the monster had ever spoken. They wished Kij's death and ate his face. The teenager screamed in pain, but there was no saving him. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon asked Park Choa how many Molotov cocktails she had left. The teenager suggested blowing everyone up by tying up their weapons and throwing them at the monsters at once. Yeon-woo overheard the conversation and shouted out that he had an idea. Kang Ji-hoon came back and asked what the idea was. The teenager suggested luring them all to one place together, especially that monster Gale. His eyes were blank and cold as he said that after that, they would blow up all the monsters. Meanwhile, the monsters were growing like cockroaches. Everyone was hiding behind the soldier who was fighting back with his weapon, but it didn't help much. It only provoked the monsters even more. Suddenly, Soyon noticed something. There were bags of garbage near the tank. The girl brought one package, and Sung-yeon asked what it was for. Soyon screamed for them to give her a lighter quickly. Others were shocked by the girl's desperation. A few minutes later, there was a massive fire. Everything was on fire. The company was hiding behind glass doors. Seon-young yelled and called Soyon crazy for setting fire to the garbage. And now the company is stuck outside the door for a long time. But the soldier denied this and called Soyon a good man. He turned to the girl and said that she had made sure that the monsters could not enter the room. Then, Gale came to the other burning monsters and growled, as if she was telling them something. At the bottom of her body was Kiju's head. Sung-yeon and the others noticed this, and she asked what they should do now. Monster Gale and the others roared at the door to the room. She was not afraid of fire. The company was shocked that the monster started talking to them. Kang Hana said in a strange voice that they could not hide from her. The monster put its tentacles through the door, and Hannah said that for some reason the company was not happy to see her. This monster was incredibly clever and let its tentacles out from the top to get inside. The soldier pointed his weapon while others screamed in panic. That's what happened. And the monster leaked through the crack from above. Soyon looked around and she was getting good at coming up with some plans. She saw that there was a kitchen behind them. Suddenly, Soyon gathered her courage and ordered the monster to leave. She took a lighted stick and stood boldly in front of the door. Soyon began to threaten and said that there was a kitchen with cylinders behind them. After such an explosion, no monster would have survived. Soyon looked confident. There was no fear in her eyes, and she invited the monster to take a chance if he was not afraid. Kang Hana said that So-young was very annoying. She repeated it several times. The case did not move forward. The monster just stood there and thought about what to do next. Suddenly, someone called him from above. It was Yeon-woo coming down the stairs. The boy was loudly recoiling because he was afraid and nervous, waiting for the monster's reaction. But it was not long in coming. So Yeon-woo quickly ran back, and Gale caught up with him. It was more attractive prey than company. The guy quickly ran away and looked back with his side vision. The monster ran after him and called his name. Kang Hana was very angry with the teenager and wished for the same fate. Soyeon looked at this with shock because they had escaped and could breathe. Through the glass, she saw a monster catching up with Yeonwoo. Suddenly, she remembered something. When they were on the cable car, Yeon-woo did exactly the same thing. The boy lured the monster to save Soyeon and the others. Even after everything that happened, Yeon-woo saved her again. Meanwhile, the teenager ran away as fast as he could. The monster was literally on his heels and catching up with him. Gale roared. She wanted to grab Yeonwoo and take revenge so badly. The teenager lured her into the room. The monster ran after him without hesitation. It is not clear who exactly controlled the mind of this animal. Yeon-woo turned a corner. The teenager was panting loudly. His strength was leaving his body. He could not run so long and fast. The monster noticed this and gave him even more strength and adrenaline. Hannah started shouting and calling Jonah to her. But the teenager did not give up and kept running, even though it was very difficult. He turned back, laughing loudly to see how far behind the monster he was. Before that, they had agreed with Kang Ji-hoon and Park Choa about the plan. The guy told Yeon-woo that it was just a suicide, but the teenager did not listen to him and said that they would put a bomb here. Yeonwoo looked around the room carefully to understand its design. The guy said that if he lured the monster to the other side of the door, they could attack him from behind. And so, Yeonwoo was a few meters away from the goal, running on his last legs. Others were supposed to wait for him there. Kang Ji-hoon saw the teenager and shouted at him to run faster. The monster was already catching up behind him, and the guy said they were ready. Gale growled. She was extremely close to the guy. Kang Ji-hoon shouted, as if he was genuinely worried about Yeonwoo, and asked him to run faster. Yeonwoo was trying so hard he could barely hold on. And then the teenager overstarts the fire, and Gale manages to release his tentacles into it. Yeonwoo lands on the floor, falling and recoiling loudly. The monster growled because it could not cross the fire. At that moment, she heard someone's voice behind her and turned around. It was Park Choa who brought the fire. Gale was trapped. The girl told the monster that it was revenge for her classmates. Gale growled because she realized her helplessness. Kang Ji-hoon threw a trap of fire at it, and the monster flew away several meters. The monster roared and burned, and their plan worked. The boys gasped loudly and looked at the burning monster. They decided to move on because it looked like they were done with Gale. The boys ran to Park Choa. She asked Yeonwoo if he was done with the monster, and he said that it was possible because no one could know for sure. The girl looked at him with respect and said that he was now the former Yeonwoo. And then she added that he was an incredible genius and praised the guy. Kang Ji-hoon heard this. Yeonwoo thanked us and said that he had been through a lot when he got off the cable car, so he was no stranger to it. Kang Ji-hoon was dissatisfied with these words and returned to them. He asked how Yeonwoo managed to survive the fire, and the boy started talking. But he didn't finish his sentence because he felt something. Suddenly, water began to flow from the ceiling because the fire detectors were triggered. The entire room was flooded with water. This meant only one thing. The fire went out, so Gale was able to survive, and Yeonwoo even heard her. The monster got to his feet. Then he growled loudly. The teenagers screamed. Their cool plan failed, even though they had high hopes for it. Then, suddenly, Soyon appeared out of nowhere, holding a stick of fire. She threw him into the Gallic Sea, thus saving the others. It was as if Soyon herself did not believe in what she was doing and was scared, although she was holding up well. The monster fell to the floor. Everyone else standing behind Soyon was shocked by what had happened. The monster growled and then started talking to the teenagers. Soyeon noticed Yeonwoo looking at her out of the corner of her eye, and she thanked him for saving her. Yeonwoo looked at the girl with shock and admiration. Park Choa reached into her briefcase, saying that the monster was too stubborn and needed to be killed. The monster denied everything and asked him to stop. The teenagers were shocked that he was talking. It was disgusting. Kang Hana said that they all betrayed her, and then she added that she couldn't move and asked not to be disturbed. Kang Ji-hoon said that the monster's legs were regenerating, and the monster was not going to die. But the monster began to deny his words. It all looked very ugly and strange. Monsters had never spoken to them before. Kang Ji-hoon turned his attention to the monster's head, which spoke. The other heads were silent. Suddenly, he began to notice and understand something. It was as if the monster was trying to pronounce Honmi's name. Kang Hana recalled how she and Honmi ran away from the monsters. The girl became very ill and could not run any further. Kang Hana grabbed her friend's hand. But Honmi said she couldn't do it anymore. It was too hard for her. She was also very scared, and her strength was leaving her. Kang Ji-hoon told the others that the voice sounded like Hana. Everyone else also looked at her, and her hairstyle was similar to her classmates. So Young said that the monster also called her name, and Park Choa asked what it meant. The girl told her that there was no time to think. They had to come up with something and burn this monster. The monster was listening to this and saw the fire in Soyeon's hands, which was dangerous for her. The monster's leg could move a little and began to recover. Yeonwoo thought about what the others were saying. Suddenly, the puzzles in his head began to come together, and he quickly tried to come up with a plan to escape. Then the monster spoke to them again. It was very bad and incomprehensible. Kang Hana mentioned Soyoung's name. The girl was confused by this and stalled. Suddenly, the monster attacked her, saying that Hana had trusted Soyeon. Yeonwoo could not let this happen. The monster was about to get the girl. There were only seconds. A teenager has never been so worried even about himself. He stretched out his hand to protect Soyeon. Yeonwoo was deceiving himself, because such actions are only done for people you love. Meanwhile, a soldier approached them. He was watching everything and noticed that Soyeon was attacked by a monster. The girl was shaking and covered herself with her hands, closing her eyes in anticipation of death. But nothing happened. Soyeon opened her eyes to see what had happened. The monster just screamed at her, opening its mouth. And in front of the monster was Yeon-woo's hand, trembling. The monster stalled, attracted by the teenager's hand. Yeon-woo closed his eyes in fear, and in his head he called himself crazy. But everything happened too quickly. His actions were faster than his thoughts. A strange sensation gripped the teenager's arm and body. He felt as if the nerves and blood vessels of the monster and his were connected, and he was scared. But Yeon-woo remembered what Lee Tae had once told him. The teenager felt the force and ordered Soyon to run away quickly. The girl was in a stupor and did not understand what was happening. But Soyon didn't listen. She looked around for something useful. She noticed a mop on fire. Meanwhile, the monster was trembling just like Yeon-woo. Kang Hana told the teenager that she felt he was as infected as she was. Yeon-woo was afraid and trembling. He did not know what these experiments could lead to. Suddenly, Soyon attacked the monster with a mop and words of apology. Everything went up in flames and smoke. Yeon-woo sat down and held his hand while the monster burned. He was in pain. It looks like the teenager got a burn on his hands. The monster was burning, but Kang Hana kept talking and called everyone stupid. She said that Yeon-woo was also infected, and the monster repeated this over and over again until she finally died. Her last words to Yeon-woo were that it was inevitable. Yeon-woo looked at the others. He understood what was about to happen because this situation had already happened. Others looked at him with condemnation and incomprehension. They were understandable because no one wanted to die. Yeon-woo knew the feeling. He looked at the burning monster, afraid to look up at the others. Kang Hana remembered Hanmi before she died. She had her back to her, and she will take the secret of her friend's death with her to the next world. Although she was a monster on the outside, inside Hana loved Hanmi and was very sorry. Kang Ji-hoon ordered everyone to leave. Suddenly he stopped because he saw something in front of him. It was a soldier who pointed his weapon at them, or rather to Yeonwoo. The teenager realized what was going on and began to panic. There was a loud sound. The soldier did not even move. It seemed he wanted to get rid of the teenager. Yeon-woo was lying on the floor. No one had time to react. Kang Ji-hoon and Park Choa could not believe what had happened. The teenager's mouth was bleeding. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. A soldier stood in front of him, holding an assault rifle over the teenager's body. Kang Ji-hoon ran at the man, screaming. The events moved indoors, and there was a fire in the Namsan Tower. Isuri came to the window. She asked the others if they had heard the sound as well. Kang Min asked if she was talking about a gunshot. Isuri said that they should have been concerned as well, because the fire was in Namsan, and the sound was coming from there as well. The girl was outraged by what was happening there. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon knocked the soldier down with his body and his shot flew past. The teenager was screaming and asking to stop shooting. The soldier could only threaten with his weapon. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo was still lying on the floor and did not move. Soyon approached him. She called out to Yeonwoo. Her voice was full of worry. The girl started shouting and asked the teenager to wake up or give a sign that he heard her. But Yeon-woo was lying there without any signs of life, and Soyoung continued to beg him. The teenager seemed to be unconscious because he felt something very strange in his hands. They were all trembling, and Yeon-woo felt some kind of power in them. Meanwhile, the military man and Kang Ji-hoon continued to fight. The man defeated the teenager, but there was no reason to be proud. Kang Ji-hoon looked up and was startled, his heart beating faster. The soldier also pointed a gun at him, saying that he did not like him from the very beginning. After that, the man took aim and said that Kang Ji-hoon was also close to Yeon-woo, so he decided that he had the right to shoot him as well. Suddenly, everyone was paying attention to something else. Kang Ji-hoon also looked to the side and could not believe his eyes. Yeon-woo just stood up. The teenager raised his strangely trembling hand. After that, he directed it at a military man. Soyeon was shocked by what she saw. Yeon-woo said that was enough. The soldier also did not understand what was happening. Yeon-woo said he was going to die and he could have killed him. Then, at that moment, the sounds of monsters roaring were heard and the soldier turned back. A pack of monsters was running behind. The soldier began to shoot back because the monsters attacked him. Seo-young approached Yeon-woo and wanted to touch him to ask what happened. But she noticed that his face was strange and covered with spots. The Soyon stopped for their own safety. After that, Yeon-woo simply collapsed. The girl screamed again, and it looked like the teenager had lost consciousness. Yeon-woo just lay there and showed no signs of life. Soyeon screamed and almost cried, begging the teenager not to lose consciousness. Yeon-woo heard her, but he couldn't help but think about how he ended up here. Then the guy started to remember something. He remembered school and his friend Kim Joo-bin. At that moment, Yeonwoo remembered that all this happened because he came to Seoul. Meanwhile, the events moved indoors. There were other soldiers and my grandmother waiting for the company, which should have returned long ago. They took the old woman out of the room. The soldier reported to the others that they had burned all the monsters in the area. He was asked if there were any survivors. The man said that there was supposed to be a group of high school students somewhere, and they were in Namsan. He added that part of their group went there and they had to pick them up and bring them back to the base. Another soldier entered the room. There was a homeless man sitting there, and the man told him that it was dangerous to stay here alone. The man looked at him silently. The soldier understood everything without words. He went out and told the others that they were coming back. The homeless man also left the room and went further down the hall. He had difficulty walking because he was wounded. In front of him was a clean basement with a bunch of pipes and strange rooms. Choi said he was already at his home, so he had nowhere else to go. He will be lucky if he survives. The man was walking and thinking that it would be nice to drink soju. Suddenly he saw something and stopped. A man with a monster was lying on the floor. Choi came closer. It was Ji-han-hyun and the monster he killed by sacrificing himself. The homeless man recognized his friend. There was sadness in his eyes because he knew what had happened, but it was harder to see it with his own eyes. Choi buried the body. After that, he stood there and shook his head. The man looked at the grave and thought that no one would have buried these people if it hadn't been for him. And then the homeless man remembered something else. He looked at the room where the teenagers were looking for Hanmi. The man went down to the same room and the door creaked. He carefully opened them and looked inside. Lee Hong-mi was lying on the floor and she also had to be buried. Meanwhile, others were running up the stairs. Kang Ji-hoon was carrying Yeon-woo on his shoulders, and Soyon was running behind him. The teenager asked the girl if anyone was chasing them. Song-yeon said that Kang Ji-hoon was originally supposed to tell her what happened to Yeon-woo, but the teenager ordered her to keep quiet and watch him. Soyon also said that now it was better to just leave the place and leave all the talk for later. Kang Ji-hoon told the bastard to stay there. If they follow him, they'll all die. But the company still did not understand what had happened. No one did. Kang Ji-hoon said that he was sure that all this happened because of Yeon-woo. There was silence. Even though the teenager was angry with the boy, he was still saving his friend. Seo-young asked what Kang Ji-hoon's words meant. Suddenly, someone from behind asked me to wait. It was Park Choa, and she stopped and said that she didn't care what was going on between them all. And then she added that she heard what that monster said. Then she said that everyone else had heard it too. Lee Young-woo was infected. The girl said it would be easier to just leave him there. Meanwhile, the events moved back to the place where the graves were. Choi was digging another hole. Hanmi was lying next to me. The homeless man complained about how hard the work was. His whole body ached, and he was not young. But the man had a goal to bury all the bodies. They deserved to rest in peace. Choi kept digging. He wanted to help these poor souls somehow. The man believed that they were getting peace then. Suddenly, Choi heard some sounds. He couldn't believe his eyes and was afraid to return, but someone was calling for help. Nevertheless, Choi gathered the courage to return. He could not believe what he was seeing. Meanwhile, the teenagers argued about what to do with Lee Yeon-woo. Kang Ji-hoon was outraged by Park Choa's words. The girl said it was pointless to bring him with her. Park Choa explained that she had cooperated with him because she wanted to save her friends. But now the game was up. She ordered them to leave Yeonwoo. Someone suddenly approached the teenagers, but they did not notice them. Someone said that he could not leave him here because Jeonwoo had saved them all from death. Suddenly everyone turned toward the sound and was shocked. But there were Isuri and Kang Min. The girl told everyone to follow them if they wanted to be saved. Soyeon was sincerely happy to see Isuri. The girl was as calm as ever and did not show any emotion, saying that it was enough to waste time. Meanwhile, the teenagers had already gone down the stairs. Sung-yeon was indignant that she did not know where they had all been taken. The teenagers were facing monsters. Kang Min said he wanted to burn them and asked for help. The guy started a fire and Kang Ji-hoon asked if it was a fire extinguisher. Kang Min turned to everyone and ordered them to flee quickly. He asked everyone to go inside immediately. Soyeon only had time to look at what was happening. Kang Min closed the door with something special, apparently to keep the monsters out. Isuri breathed a sigh of relief and took off her cloak. The other teenagers laughed loudly and were glad that it was finally over. Kang Ji-hoon was still holding Yeon-woo. Isuri noticed this and was surprised. The girl saw a large wound on the teenager's body. Everyone was sitting in the kitchen. Someone said that Yeon-woo was bleeding. Kang Ji-hoon was silent at first. And then he looked up. It was Isuri. And Kang Ji-hoon asked how they all survived. To which the girl said that she was just like them. And then she added that it didn't matter how they all survived. They needed fire. The girl said that there was a big fire in Namsan, and then she asked why they went there in the first place. Kang Ji-hoon didn't like the tone with which Isuri spoke. Kang Min interrupted this argument and asked where the others were, and if they could not save Honmi after all. Kang Ji-hoon put his head down and remained silent. He started to speak, interrupting himself, and you could hear how hard it was for him. He paused again to collect his thoughts. Soyon said that when they found her, it was too late, and added that Hana and Yihan Hyun were not with them either. Kang Min was sympathetic and did not know what to say. Everyone was silent, and the tension was palpable. But the greatest sadness came from Kang Ji-hoon, who knew what Honmi meant to him. Suddenly, Song-yeon told everyone to stop. She was selfish, sitting on the phone and saying she didn't want to remember them. She explained that she was already feeling bad. And then she added that they had to get out before it was too late because Seoul was about to be closed. She was interrupted by Isuri, who asked if Seon-young was that worried about her life. As usual, she didn't even look at the other person. And then she said that they theoretically had time to get to the exit. She added that since Seon-young had a phone, she had to find the place on a map. They saw that Dongseol Station was located on the banks of the Han River, and they had to cross the river anyway. So to get there, the teenagers had to go through a lot of problems. Isuri added that it would be difficult for them to be Yeon-woo. Sung-yeon just laughed and said she didn't understand. The girl said that there would be soldiers there, so they didn't need Yeon-woo. Isuri agreed with Sung-yeon's words, and then added that if she could handle the fire extinguisher herself, she could leave. And then she said that it was dangerous for them. Park Choa interrupted the conversation and asked why no one wanted to leave him if he was infected. So-young exhaled and listened to the girl talk about the danger to Yeon-woo. And then she started talking. So-yeon suggested that everyone prepare for this moment, when Yeon-woo could theoretically pose a threat to everyone. Everyone looked into the room where Yeon-woo was sleeping. Meanwhile, Kang Min, Kang Ji-hoon, and Isuri were looking at their laptops and searching for something. Kang Min said that he followed the news from time to time. And then I opened an article with photos of monsters. Kang Ji-hoon said how disgusting these monsters were. Kang Ming said that the infection occurred without visible symptoms, but the monsters could merge together. Simply put, this meant that the infection rate was decreasing. Isuri added that more of the monsters they encountered were fused into one. This implied that when cells divided inside the body tried to survive and fight the cells. Kang Ji-hoon then asked if this meant that there were no problems. Isuri said that these were all just theories, and Kang Min asked her about the monster that merged with the man she had seen. The girl turned around and seemed to be heading for the exit, and the guys kept asking her about it. The girl thought that one of the options was the evolution of monsters, and it seemed that the military near the Han River did not even suspect this, so what kind of salvation could we talk about? Meanwhile, So-young sat next to Yeon-woo and watched. Isuri came up and asked how things were going, but it was obvious. So-young sighed sadly and said that Yeon-woo never woke up. Isuri said it was not even possible to cure him. They were in danger with Yeon-woo. And then she added that if he ended up in a military camp, he would be killed and buried somewhere. She said she was sure that all those infected were killed. And then Isuri left, saying that all we had to do was believe in a miracle and talk to him when he woke up. Soyon was shocked by this speech and tried to digest everything in her head. She looked at Yeonva. The phrase that the teenager was infected kept running through my head, and everyone believed it. But for some reason, they were not afraid. So-young remembered Yeon-woo's face before he fainted. Even then, the girl was very scared when she saw the teenager. So-yeon was tired and thought that it all sounded unreal. She wanted so much for it to be just a dream. The girl did not want to believe it. She wondered if she was regretting something. Meanwhile, Kang Min and Kang Ji-hoon were thinking of an escape plan. If they can't cross the bridge, the road will get a lot longer. And then Kang Min added that we should stock up on oil before we go. Sung-yeon was thinking about something and looking around. Then she saw Park Choa and asked him to wait for her. Sung-yeon suggested that she leave separately from everyone else, but Park Choa refused because it was too dangerous, to which Seon-young replied that there would be soldiers there. Park Choa said that if they were infected, she would be killed anyway. Sung-yeon was angry that everything was so difficult because of Yeon-woo, and then asked that if they took the infected person out of Seoul, then the whole world would be in danger. Park Choa was silent and thinking, and then she asked what Seong-yeon was hinting at. Meanwhile, So-young was still sitting next to Yeon-woo. She was just checking her phone to kill time. Suddenly, Yeon-woo woke up. So-yeon jumped out of her seat. The teenager was scared and did not know where he was, so he was breathing loudly. So-yeon tried to calm him down. She said they were coming home. Yeon-woo tried to get up. The teenager was shivering and completely exhausted. Soyon looked on in silence and could not believe how he had survived all that. Isuri was standing in the doorway. She was watching what was happening. So-young came closer to Yeon-woo. His body was shaking. He could barely stand. She leaned over to the teenager to see if he was okay. So-yeon said she thought he was dead and was glad he wasn't. Yeon-woo started to cry. The teenager asked her not to leave him and offered to walk home together, saying that he was sorry for what had happened. So-yeon said that everything was fine and he just needed to rest a bit. Others entered the teenager's room, and they were all shocked, to say the least. Kang-min openly expressed his shock and said that it was incredible that Yeon-woo had woken up. But the teenager remained silent and tried to realize everything. Kang Ji-hoon asked how Yeon-woo was feeling, as he had been unconscious for a long time. He added that the bastard had shot him, so Yeon-woo probably couldn't get up now. Yeon-woo simply nodded. And then he said that Kang Ji-hoon must have brought it from Namsan and thanked him for saving him. Kang Ji-hoon didn't know how to react, because he and Yeon-woo had been almost enemies before. And then, the teenager just turned around and asked me to stop talking nonsense. Then the others entered the room. Park Choa said that now they had to have a serious talk. Yeon-woo sat by the wall and waited for the attack. Park Choa told the teenager to answer them honestly. And then she asked if Yeon-woo was infected. Sung-yeon exploded and told him not to even dare to deceive them or deny the obvious. Isuri intervened in the conversation and pushed Park Choa away, telling Yeon-woo in a calm voice not to be afraid of them, but to tell the truth. Isuri asked him to be honest with them because they were in the same boat, and Yeon-woo started to speak. But the girl interrupted him and said she had only one question. She paused so that her words did not sound strange. And then she asked if Yeon-woo was immune to the infection. Meanwhile, the events moved to the marketplace. There was nothing on the shelves. Everything had been taken apart. Kang Ming was indignant that there was nothing useful and suggested looking elsewhere. Kang Ji-hoon said that he was also empty. Yeon-woo followed the crowd. They were going to check another warehouse. Suddenly, the teenager felt something. He told the others to be careful. There really was a monster behind the door. He would growl at the others and hide in the warehouse. The guys were scared. A few minutes later, everything was on fire. The teenagers took everything they could carry from the warehouse. But they did not burn the monster completely because there was no time. Kang Ji-hoon called out to So-young, and she seemed a little scared. He asked why the girl was frozen and ordered her to walk faster. So-yeon looked at Yeonwoo and Isuri. Isuri asked the boy what else he knew about the characteristics of monster cells. So-yeon recalled the conversation when Yeonwoo talked about immunity. The teenager then realized that he had to tell the truth. Otherwise, he would be left behind or killed. Isuri then asked if Yeonwoo had some kind of substance in his body or if it was really immunity. She remembered the conversation she had with the guy in the shelter when he said he had met someone who was immune to infection. She reminded the teenager about her and added that she immediately guessed everything when she saw the wounded Yeonwoo. Because just because a person had immunity did not mean that he was not infected. The mutation was just not so obvious. Yeonwoo said that he did not understand exactly what it was and was not sure about it, but he added that maybe it was just as Isuri said. Yeonwoo said he didn't know if they would believe him or not, but he was immune to infection and couldn't have become such a monster. The teenager finally admitted it. The events moved back to reality. Sung-young asked Kang Ji-hoon if he believed in all of this, but he said he didn't know. The girl was very indignant and asked if anyone else had heard of immunity to infection, saying that it was all a hoax to survive. She called on everyone to look at Yeonwoo and said that the teenager was planning something against them. Soyon listened to her words in silence and looked at the teenager. Meanwhile, the company was ready to go. They took supplies with them and walked carefully. Kang Min said to take the oil and run forward, when suddenly they noticed something. In front of them was a gang of robbers who were beating a man. The company hid behind a car and watched everything. Several guys beat the man and threatened him. Kang Min asked if they were supposed to help the man. The events moved back in time when the teenagers learned about Yeonwoo's immunity. Kang Min stood up and said that they all looked very funny now. After all, if such people really existed, it was salvation for them. Meanwhile, Yeonwoo was in the other room. He was standing in the bathtub by the mirror. The guy lifted his t-shirt to look at his wound. It was delayed, and his body regenerated quickly. He did not understand why he was so anxious, even though there was no danger. Yeonwoo felt as if everything was unreal and his cells were simply collapsing. He wondered what would happen to him if he continued to exist like this. Yeonwoo realized that he had to find Lee Tae to find out what was happening to him. Isuri entered the room. She asked Yeonwoo to show her early to know the teenager's condition. The guy looked at her silently. Meanwhile, the table was discussing Han Song-yu. Kang Min said he thought he was using them as bait when he arrived from Namsan. He added that there was something unclean here. After all, when everyone is in a panic, there is a riot going on around them and no one notices anything. Kang Min remembered Han Song-yu. Meanwhile, Soyon was walking down the hall. She heard a conversation outside the door and Yeon-woo's voice. She came closer. Isuri listened to the teenager. Yeon-woo talked about Lee Tae and said that the man knew more and he had come all the way to Namsan to meet him. The teenager added that it was difficult to understand what was happening to him. Isuri listened intently to Yeonwoo in silence. Suddenly she said he was not alone. Soyon was listening to their conversation and did not dare to come in. Isuri said that without them, Yeonwoo would not be able to cope. And then she said that in truth, they needed him too. Soyon felt something strange inside. These two were close. Isuri told Yeonwoo that she had promised him that they would return together. The guy was pleased to hear this. Isuri looked directly into his eyes as he looked into hers. The girl told Yeonwoo not to worry about anything. Meanwhile, the events moved to the Namsan Tower. Everything around it caught fire. A man loudly shook his head and ran. And then he stopped and cursed someone. It was a military man whom Yeonwoo had set monsters on. The man threatened to find the teenagers. Suddenly, his eyes were filled with anger and he promised to kill Yeonwoo. Meanwhile, Soyon overheard an unpleasant conversation between Yeonwoo and Isuri. She looked down, as if something inside her was clenched in pain. Soyon thought about how long it had been since the two had talked like this. She was clearly an extra, and that was hard. Suddenly, their conversation changed its tone. Yeonwoo said he didn't think it was possible what Isuri was talking about. He said he could not betray his friends. They had already risked their lives to save him. Yeonwoo told Isuri that they had to cross the Han River, and then they could leave Seoul. Soyon listened carefully to the boy's words. He didn't seem interested in supporting Isuri. Yeonwoo turned away from the girl and asked her not to say that anymore. Isuri's eyes narrowed and she looked angry. After that, the girl rudely replied and turned around and walked away. Yeonwoo just stood there silently looking down. Isuri concluded by saying that the boy seemed to be smart, but he acted so stupidly. Suddenly, the girl noticed something. She turned her head to look at him and came closer. Meanwhile, other teenagers were looking out the window at a gang of robbers riding motorcycles. Kang Ming asked if the company wanted to just watch them, given the speed of monster mergers. Soyon came into the room. The teenagers were discussing how they could get to the river and cross it without being seen. Kang Min noticed Seo Young and asked about Yeonwoo, where he was. The girl was a little nervous, but she didn't let on and said that he was in the bathroom. The company immediately switched to something else and discussed something of their own. Soyon listened to them out of the corner of her eye, but she was deep in thought. She wondered if she could trust Yeonwoo, or if she still couldn't. These thoughts weighed too heavily on her, and she decided it was better to stop thinking about it. Meanwhile, the gang made it to the store, which was set on fire and almost burned down. One of the members said that they did not set fire to the building. They came to the conclusion that they were not alone. Someone else was setting the monsters on fire. The gang leader said they had to find these scum who were on their territory. The events moved to the room where the homeless man Choi was staying. It was not far from the tower and from teenagers. The man was sitting next to him, looking out the window, with a covered Hanmi lying next to him. He looked at the girl out of the corner of his eye and said that she would soon begin to rot. Choi was thinking about where it would be best to bury Hanmi, but he couldn't find a place. After all, whether she was dead or not, Hanmi was still infected, and there was nothing you could do about it. Choi could not make up his mind and make a choice. After all, it was not clear what had happened to the girl. Suddenly, someone asked the man why he was burying everyone, and added that Choi risked death if he left things as they were. The homeless man was wary because the soldiers had all left. Then two guys came into the room, not expecting to see a homeless man. Choi stood up and ordered everyone to leave immediately. He said he was not expecting anyone and had nothing for them to take. One of the men said that the smell in the room was rotten. Then the guys looked at Hanmi. Her motionless body resembled something, so everyone could have misunderstood. The guys called her, but she was silent. Then one of the teenagers smiled and asked if Choi needed help, and another made a bad joke. The homeless man abruptly interrupted them and ordered them to leave. Then the guys just laughed. The man was afraid that he could not protect Hanmi. He could not let anything happen to her. The guy told his partner that the man looked suspicious and called him a pervert, and the other supported this opinion. Choi was thinking about getting them to leave as soon as possible, because he couldn't handle two of them. He didn't have the strength. Then, a soldier entered the room and asked the guy if he was still alive. The man pointed the finger at the boys. Then he said that they annoyed him. A few seconds later, the gang was lying on the floor. Choi looked at the poor boys in shock. It had all happened so fast that he didn't have time to react. He looked at the soldier's face. He looked very strange and sick. The man asked Choi how he was feeling, but the homeless man did not know how to behave and simply said that the soldier had just killed the guys. Choi realized that the soldier had gone crazy, but asked why he had done it and whether they were with these guys. The man skipped these questions and simply said that he had observed that Choi was alone. The homeless man realized that something had happened, but simply replied that no one had come to see him. He added that this was the only reason he was sitting here waiting. The soldier turned to the man and asked why he couldn't contact him, to which Choi said he didn't know his number. The homeless man decided to change the conversation and asked what kind of shelter they were talking about. Choi said that the soldier seemed to have brothers and that he would be better off going to them. But the man seemed to be angry, and he turned and looked at Choi sternly, repeating the word, brothers. The homeless man said that there was a shelter at Seoul Station, and if the soldier came from there, he would have been better off going back there. The man repeated the word shelter and said he would go there and check if it was true. Choi looked at the soldier and called him over. The man's eyes were crazy, and he said that it was unlikely that a homeless person would be allowed to go with this girl because she was most likely infected. Choi stood up and said that the soldier was right and it was dangerous to be around her. And then he shouted as if he remembered something. He told the soldier that he heard the sound of a car. The man said that someone had parked it and it was standing alone with the keys inside. And then he asked if the soldier had seen anyone when he came here. The man looked at him with his crazed gaze and asked if the homeless man was sure of his words. The soldier left the room and went outside. Choi barely got rid of him, cold sweat dripping down his face. The homeless man came out of the room carrying Yeon-mi. Choi said out loud that his instincts told him that the soldier was very dangerous. He asked Yeon-mi to be patient a little longer because it was hard for him to carry her. Suddenly, someone called Choi and asked him where he was going. A soldier stood in front of the exit and told the homeless man that the parking lot was on the other side. The man looked at Choi with his crazed gaze and said that he was not a fool and had looked around the parking lot on his way to this place. Meanwhile, someone was video blogging near the Kan River. It was a guy wearing a mask, glasses, and gloves. He was filmed by a friend. The blogger talked about what was happening near the Kan River. Either the bridge was being blocked or there was a new uprising of survivors. He showed me around Seoul and said that the city was in an emergency situation and it was scary to even enter. Then he showed the soldiers and said that they worked hard to find the survivors. And then the blogger pointed the camera at the houses with huge eggs on them. The guy promised to show everything to his subscribers. The blogger told us where they were going and what they were going to see, and also told us about the flamethrower's instructions. The guy's partner was not so brave. He pointed the camera at what was under the bridge and said that there were a lot of virus cells there. The blogger continued that the cells had no nucleus, but the size of the eggs had grown very much. The guys came very close. His partner was so afraid that cold sweat was running down his face. But the blogger didn't think about the consequences and continued to blog. Content was more important to him than life. His partner asked if Hyun was really going to go there. But the blogger said it was all a hoax. He would just undermine the content with this video. They will believe that there were no monsters anywhere, only monster cells and eggs. The blogger asked the viewers if they were now convinced. He said that there was no one but them and the cells, and then asked if the audience was waiting for them to go to the other side. Suddenly, a huge monster that looked like an exoskeleton emerged from the water. Its head resembled a crocodile's face. It seemed to be a new kind of monster that could live underwater. Meanwhile, the blogger said he was a little scared and asked if any of his followers wanted to join them. Suddenly, in the chat, subscribers began to write that someone was moving behind them. The guy took it as a joke and that his followers were playing a prank. Suddenly, the boys heard monsters roaring, and when they turned around, they saw terrible monsters. They were in a stupor and did not know what to do. Followers wrote that these monsters were different from the others. Then the guys came to their senses and ran as fast as they could. Their followers laughed at them in the comments. The blogger continued to blog and said that the shape of the monster was different. It had slime on its body, but its arms and legs were solid. The limbs were covered with bones, like exoskeletons. The guy showed me that more and more monsters were coming out of the water, they just kept coming. Then the blogger's partner opened fire on the monsters. The guys were already tired of running. Suddenly my partner's face changed a lot. She was scared. The monster did not die from the fire. It seems that the mucus on its body made it fireproof. The guys started screaming and begging for rescue, and the military nearby heard them and took notice. Meanwhile, the events moved to the room where Choi and the soldier were. The homeless man was lying on the floor and being kicked by a soldier. The man was yelling and calling the poor man names. Then he hit Choi with his heavy boot on the homeless man's face. After that, he fell to the ground exhausted, barely breathing. The soldier grabbed Choi by the hair and lifted his head, ordering him to answer honestly whether anyone had come to see him. The homeless man barely spoke, making long pauses between words, but said that no one came. Then the soldier threw the man's head away as if it were a thing. He got up and said that Choi stank terribly. Then his eyes fell on something behind him. He turned his attention to Hanmi, who was still lying on the floor. The soldier then told Choi that he had to take care of himself first. The man came out of the room and said that he was just furious. He turned and looked at the homeless man again with his crazy look, saying that a little more, and his patience would just burst. Choi remained in that room, barely breathing and bleeding. The soldier went outside. He looked around the area and had to think carefully. The man climbed higher to get a better look at where the bastards could have gone. Meanwhile, the teenagers were looking at the map program and searching for routes. Kang Ming said that the shortest way would be to walk in a circle and that there would be special bases at the place of arrival. He added that they were then able to return home and asked if everyone was ready to go. His classmates stared at him in silence, waiting for him to act. Kang Min said that the motorcyclists had stopped walking around, and they could only hope that they would not meet on the road. Kang Ji-hoon said they didn't have time and ordered them to pack for the road. Isuri said that she would take the food, but that they would not share it with those girls who did not want to take anything. 2 girls attacked the food on the table. It was Isuri and Soyon. There was an awkwardness between them, and the 2 of them stalled. Soyon started to speak first, but stuttered. In the end, she said she would take half. The teenagers set out on the road. Park Choa and Song Yeon were walking behind me, and they were discussing Isuri, saying that she was very arrogant. Xiong Young said that at school, Isuri acted like a queen and the other girls hated her for it. Park Choa asked if her classmates still held grudges from the past, and she answered in the affirmative. Meanwhile, the teenagers reached the bridge. Kang Min said that they all got a little closer to the Han River. The guy added that he hadn't seen any monsters, so he didn't know if it was possible to cross the bridge very quickly. Park Choa stopped for a second, as if she had noticed something. Kang Min saw this and asked the girl what she noticed. At first, Park Cho didn't want to share and simply brushed it off. And then she said that these cells, she felt as if they were watching them all. Kang Min didn't take these words seriously and said that Park Choa was just making herself up, but she didn't want to believe it. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo felt sick again and started breathing loudly and deeply. He looked around but saw no danger. But his arm started to hurt and tremble, and he thought it was just a reaction to the cells. Isuri was walking behind us, and she noticed that Jeon-woo was trembling and acting strangely. The girl came closer and asked him how he was feeling. At first, Yeon-woo did not realize who had approached him, but it distracted him from the pain. Soyon was walking behind them and overheard the teenagers' conversation. She seemed to be angry, and Isuri demanded from Jeon-woo that he share with her what happened to him. The girl seemed to be kind and caring, as much as she could be, and asked him to share with her everything that Jeon-woo was feeling. Soyon could not understand what was going on between the two. Then, Kang Min suggested taking a break because he was hungry. The others supported the idea, and Jeon-woo turned his attention to Soyon. The girl was also looking at him, and they met her eyes. After that, Soyon simply turned around and left. Jeon-woo followed her and asked her not to go alone. The soybean stopped, and so did the boy. They stood still and looked forward. There was a fire in front. Something must have happened on the riverbank because there was dark smoke coming from there. Sung-yeon was chatting with someone on her phone. She found something interesting because the cut of her face had changed. Then the girl called Park Choa. She told her classmate that she had found out something, but first she had to find out where they were. Isuri overheard their conversation, even though they were trying to be quiet. She asked the girls about it. I asked who they had just spoken to. Sung-yeon exploded and asked if Isuri was mocking them, or if she had to report all her phone conversations to her. But Isuri replied that Seon Young was only talking in vain and wasting her time and Isuri's. And then the girl added that if Seong-yeon had been paying attention to the map on her phone, she would have known where they were. Then she turned and looked at Seon-young. She called her stupid and said that it was hard to keep up with her. Isuri turned around and left, finally asking Seon-young to be quiet for a while. Otherwise, her patience would not last long. But Seon-young fell for the provocation and called Isuri names in response. Meanwhile, 2 people were running to the company. They shouted that they were in a terrible situation. It was a blogger and his partner. They were calling the company for help and could barely run. The guy in disguise was happy to see the teenagers. He hugged Kang Min and said that they had come to help them. But the teenager did not understand who he was. The blogger told them to be serious because the teenagers came here because they had seen his broadcast. Isuri stood there with a stony face and did not understand what was happening. The blogger opened his arms, hinting at a hug, and said that everything happened too fast. But he would hug everyone as he promised. Then a fire extinguisher was put in his face, which served as a flamethrower. Isuri asked with a serious face what this guy was doing. Meanwhile, the events moved to the basement where Choi and Honmi were. The homeless man tried to open the door, but the bastard locked him in. He was worried about Honmi, because by the time the soldier returned, she would be dead. Suddenly, Honmi coughed. The girl opened her eyes and began to show signs of life. Then she looked around and asked where she was. Choi was so excited when Honmi woke up that he pounced on her with questions about how she was feeling. The homeless man came closer and said that her friends had come to see her, but because of her severe wound, they all assumed the worst. Choi said he checked her wound and it wasn't very serious. Hong-mi looked down at him and didn't look at her husband. The girl could barely speak, but Choi's words struck her. Hong-mi asked if he had saved her, and then the girl said she was deceived and betrayed. She spoke very slowly, pausing between words. Choi listened attentively to the poor woman and did not interrupt. He asked Hong-mi to tell him what happened. The girl began to remember, and her head lifted. After a short pause, she said that a friend had betrayed her. Hong-mi began her story. They ran into this room. It seemed safe. In fact, the girls were running away from Kim Min-ju, who had become infected and was chasing them. My classmates ran down the stairs. They didn't look where they were going. They just ran. The girls ran into the hiding place. Hong-mi sat quietly but cried because she was afraid for her life. Next to her was Kang Hana, who was also trembling with fear. Hong-mi asked her classmate where the others were, but she replied with a cold voice that now was not the time to think about others. Hana acted strangely, saying that only the 2 of them were left, and they had a chance to get out of here. Hong-mi was frightened by her friend's behavior, and she emphasized several times that only the 2 of them would survive. The monster, Kim Min-ju, walked down the hallway looking for her victims. Kang Hana peered through the crack in the door. Hong-mi sat there shivering. Hana said it was time to run and get out, but Hong-mi refused. She said she couldn't walk anymore. Hong-mi was crying and suggested that we wait here until the others came. She asked Hana to call her classmates because she still had her phone. Hana turned around and she was angry. Her face looked frantic, and she asked why Hong-mi kept waiting for the others if she was with her now. Hong-mi was scared because she had never seen her friend like this before. Kang Hana became angrier and spoke with long pauses. She said that she was now risking her life to protect Hong-mi. Choi listened to the girl carefully. He was shocked by this story. Hong-mi cried and said that she understood how Hana felt, and she should have noticed it earlier. Choi apologized and said he didn't know how to help her. He just asked if all her classmates were here. Suddenly, Hong-mi remembered something about her classmates. Kang Hana walked by her side at school and asked if she had read the comments. There were more than 50 of them. Hong-mi was excited. She didn't follow her channel as much as Hana. Then my friend promised that after the exam, she would edit Hong-mi's videos every day. Park Min came down the stairs and offered to buy something for Hanma, even a gift. Hong-mi gladly accepted the invitation to buy pizzas and colas and sit somewhere. The teenagers cheerfully discussed their plans, but Kang Hana didn't want to, and her mood immediately disappeared. Lee Hong-mi noticed this and looked at her friend out of the corner of her eye. Every time Hong-mi talked to Park Min, Kang Hana just walked away from them. The atmosphere then became uncomfortable. Hong-mi told Park Min about it, but now she regretted it a little. In the end, Hana couldn't take it anymore. Then another monster came into their room. The girls were scared, but they had to run. The monster opened the door from the other side and entered, blocking the passage. The girls screamed in fear. They quickly ran through another exit without looking ahead. Suddenly, they noticed something in front of them. Then an exoskeleton came out of the corner. He noticed the victims immediately, and there was no point in fighting such a giant. The monster immediately attacked the girls. He was very fast. My classmates froze for a second. Then Kang Hana grabbed Lee Hongmi's hand. She ordered the girl to distract the monster, and Hanmi could not understand what was happening. Kang Hana told Hanma to stay here and she would go look for help. She wanted to say that her friend had also dumped her, but she didn't have time because Hanmi had escaped from her arms. Before she knew it, a huge monster growled in front of her. Hanmi's eyes showed fear and despair. She realized that it was the end. The exoskeleton cut through the girl's body with its bone paw like a skewer. That was the end of the story. Choi tried to calm Hongmi down and said that her friend was having a hard time at school. The homeless man said that Hannah did not kill Hanmi, but saved him because she used herself as bait. But Hanmi didn't understand what Choi was getting at. He explained that Hannah had lured the monster to her friends, but left her behind. It seems that her friend loved her too much to betray her. The homeless man stood up and said that the person Hanmi considered an enemy had sacrificed himself in the end. But Hanmi still had a hard time understanding this. She had never looked at the situation from this angle. Then Hanmi started calling the homeless man. He seemed to open her eyes to everything. Suddenly the girl started crying a lot. She said she would really like to meet Kang Hana and apologize to her. Choi said there was no time to be sad. Hanmi did not understand. She missed so much because she was unconscious. Choi said that Hongmi's friends were in danger and that the man who locked them in here was looking for the teenagers. The homeless man looked at the only window in the room. He said they had to get out of here somehow. He turned to Hanmi and asked if she could get up by stepping on him. Meanwhile, the teenagers watched the channel of a blogger who came to them. The guy could not believe that they did not know him and were seeing him for the first time. He said that they were cheating because he was facing the hottest blogger in Seoul. The blogger's partner whispered in his ear that the teenagers really didn't know him, but he ordered him to shut up. Isuri asked what the bloggers had forgotten in such a dangerous place and reminded them that they were running from someone. The blogger said with a smile that there were underwater monsters and they were running away from them, and then asked what they were doing here. Isuri didn't answer because she was the first to speak, and then she asked what they were filming. But the blogger said it was too many questions. Isuri was angry at this childish behavior. She asked him to tell her what the situation was on the Khan River. For some reason, the blogger kept smiling and asked if the teenagers were going to that particular river. Then, behind the blogger, his partner shouted that he would not go there again. The guy told him to shut up and speak in a whisper. The blogger said that if the teenagers were going to the river, they should have told him in advance, because it was the perfect time to go for a walk there. He offered to help, but the expressions on the teenagers' faces spoke for themselves. Meanwhile, the events moved to another street. The soldier was riding a motorcycle and holding a weapon. The events moved to Hanmi and Choi. They got out of the basement, and the homeless man opened the door to the room where he had been before. The sight made my blood run cold. There were innocent boys lying on the floor. They showed no signs of life at all. The soldier did not even burn them, but left them like that. Choi could barely move after the beatings, but he went inside. The homeless man only assured him once again that the soldier was not in his right mind, and that the teenagers were in danger. It turned out that one of the motorcyclists could still speak, and he asked Choi to listen to his request. The guy asked whom the soldier was looking for, because he told them he wanted to kill someone and take revenge. He asked Choi to avenge the motorcyclist, and then they could meet him in hell. It was the poor man's last request. Then Choi asked to borrow a motorcycle to find this crazy man. Meanwhile, the teenagers were in trouble. Someone called out to them, and when they turned around, they saw him. A soldier was following them on a motorcycle. Even from a distance, I could see his angry face. Kang Ji-hoon and Park Choa were the first to see the soldier and immediately reacted by running. The guy ordered the others to run as well. He realized that they were in trouble now. Yeonwoo was running on orders, but came back to see what was happening. When he realized, his heart beat faster because he saw the face of a military man. The man's eyes became crazy when he saw Jonah. The teenagers ran as fast as they could and went down under the bridge. Kang Min asked Kang Ji-hoon why they were running and what happened. The guy said that this crazy man was here and that he killed Hannah with a machine gun. Meanwhile, the soldier drove by the bridge and looked around. He had the advantage of transportation. It seemed that the man had noticed something. Park Choa hypothesized that this soldier started the fire because she saw that everything was in smoke. And then I asked him how he knew they were here. Isuri looked at Yeonwoo, who was barely breathing. It was obvious that he was not feeling well. The girl tried to find out the truth from him, but he was silent. Isuri decided to try again and went over to ask how Jeonwoo was feeling. Kang Ji-hoon yelled at them for stopping and ordered them to run faster. Soyon noticed this. Isuri didn't run and asked why they had to run if they were outnumbered. She told everyone to close up because she was thinking. She looked away and muttered something under her breath, and then said that they could have gotten rid of the crazy man. Meanwhile, a soldier climbed to the top of the bridge and held a weapon in his hands. The teenagers did not run away. They just stood there and looked at him. The man was sure they were up to something. The soldier was talking to himself like a psychopath. He talked about how defenseless the teenagers were now, and next to the infected Yeon-woo. The teenagers did not leave and stood silently in front of the soldier. The man said he wanted to resolve the issue. He told the teenagers that if they all continued to behave like this, they would not survive. The soldier assured me that he was trying to help them now. He looked directly at Yeonwoo, and the boy looked back at him. Kang Ji-hoon said it was coming. The others were worried and afraid that they would be killed, but no one ran away. The Isuri stood silently with stony faces that showed no fear. The soldier laughed. The teenagers did not understand what had happened. The man said that they had seen everything themselves, how quickly Yeon-woo regenerated, so there was nothing to talk about. He asked if the teenagers still believed his nonsense. The soldier said that he was the only one who knew the way out of Seoul and also knew where their friend was. He said that if they cooperated with him, he would help them. Park Choa asked if the soldier had mentioned Hanmi, because the teenagers said she had passed away. Kang Ji-hoon could not believe what he was hearing. His heart was racing, and he was ready to give up everything for Hanmi. The teenager said that it was clear that the soldier was deceiving them. He was crazy. Kang Ji-hoon said that it couldn't be true, and the man was deceiving them. They didn't believe him. The soldier just laughed in response and then asked who he had seen. Kang Ji-hoon was shocked again. He was playing to his feelings. He wanted it to be true, but it wasn't. Then the soldier stood up. After that, he jumped off the bridge. The man landed right in front of the teenagers. Yeon-woo and Isuri were ahead. The man said the choice was theirs. The teenagers were scared but did not leave. The soldier ordered them to turn away from the infected Yeon-woo and go to his side, and then they would also save their friend. Suddenly something moved in the water. Yeon-woo felt it immediately, his arm stabbed. He looked at the river, and there was nothing there. But Yeon-woo had a brilliant idea. Isuri noticed his interest in water. She asked the teenager what had happened. But when I saw the river, I understood everything without words. It seems they had the same plan. Meanwhile, the soldier tried to prove to them that Yeon-woo was infected. He added that they had to get rid of him. Then Isuri stood up to the company and set the fire. She said she suspected Yeonwoo from the very beginning. The teenager was a little scared of what he heard. Everyone was in shock. Isuri spoke seriously, so it was easy to believe her. She supported the fact that they had to get rid of Yeon-woo. Kang Min and Kang Ji-hoon were shocked and told Isuri to calm down. The girl told the teenagers to come to their senses, because Yeon-woo would infect them and turn them into monsters. Isuri said that if they stood up for Yeonwoo, they would die for violating the quarantine rules. And then she pointed a gun at them and ordered them to decide whether they wanted to choose life or death. Isuri added that everyone who came into contact with Yeon-woo would also be considered infected. The teenagers were outraged by the girl's words. The soldier was just silent, but he seemed to like what was happening. Behind Yeon-woo stood So-young. She was very worried about her friend and herself. She did not want to betray him again. Isuri told her classmates not to doubt her because she had stayed away from Yeon-woo from the beginning. She asked if they would be safe if they isolated the infected person. Isuri didn't look at Yeonwoo at all, but the boy kept looking at her and tried not to show any emotion. The soldier looked at Isuri as if he felt proud. The girl shouted at the teenagers to decide quickly and added that as long as there was an infected person among them, there would be no way home. So-young was thinking about what had happened to Isuri, because when the two of them were talking in the bathroom, she had said that she would not leave Yeonwoo. Was it possible that all her words were just a lie? Soyon then asked the soldier if he would really help them and return Hanmi. The girl asked carefully and did not move. She did not want to choose a side. Suddenly, she remembered that the military had promised to return them all to the base, and she reminded her husband of this. The soldier did not know what to say, and said he was not sure. Then Kang Ji-hoon asked if Hanmi was really alive. The guy could not believe it himself, and his words were paused, and his sentences were incoherent. The soldier looked at him out of the corner of his eye and said that he was not like them and did not know how to cheat. Then, the man put the muzzle of the gun very close to Yeon-woo and said that he would be the first. Kang Ji-hoon asked the soldier to allow him to meet with her. Yeon-woo was shocked and did not know how to react. The man did not listen and asked Yeon-woo if he could survive if he was shot in the head. Kang Ji-hoon shouted at them to wait. Behind the soldier, Isuri stood with a fire and looked at Kang Ji-hoon. She whispered to the boy to be ready because she was going to set the man on fire when he attacked him. Kang Ji-hoon was shocked. He didn't know what to do because he wanted to meet Hanmi. He looked at the soldier. He could not believe him, but the deception was so sweet. Then he just ran without thinking to attack the soldier. Suddenly something happened to his legs. They didn't want to move. He wondered what if Hanmi was really alive. The risks were too great. Isuri was furious that the boy had made a mistake. A soldier noticed this. He asked what Kang Ji-hoon was trying to do. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo stood there panicking, trying to think of a plan. The soldier asked if Ji-hoon wanted to save this infected man. He smiled at the teenager and asked if he really thought he could do it. Then, Soyon intervened and told the soldier to wait and not to do it. Suddenly, Park Cho ran away. She wanted to attack the soldier. Everyone was against her husband. The girl simply leaned on the soldier with her entire body and wait. And then they flew into the river. The guys were in a stupor and did not know how to react. The soldier came out and screamed. Park Choa also looked at her classmates. Yeon-woo extended his hand to her immediately. He shouted for her to give him her hand because she had to get out quickly. Yeon-woo knew there were monsters in there. Park Choa grabbed hold of the teenager. They took her out. Others also came up and asked how she was feeling. Meanwhile, the soldier was drowning behind him and cursing the teenagers. Isuri told him not to turn his head and not to scream. She came closer and asked where Hanmi was. But the man just laughed and said he wouldn't answer. Isuri asked again if Hanmi was alive and promised to help if the soldier answered. The man said he would not believe them anymore because the teenagers had just betrayed him. Isuri called him a fool and asked if he would regret it later. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo was hanging around Park Choa. He didn't expect this from the girl and wanted to know that she was safe. Suddenly something shocked Yeonwoo. Sung-gyeon was screaming near So-young because her hand was covered in blood. She screamed and called others for help because Soyon was badly injured. Others immediately ran up to the girl, asking about her condition. Yeon-woo looked at the river. The soldier asked him why he was looking at him. Suddenly, Yeon-woo became completely angry. His emotions were running high. He pointed his finger at the man again and ordered him to die. But the soldiers said that they would all die now. Suddenly, monsters appeared from under the water. The man noticed and came back. There were more and more monsters and they were getting stronger. The soldier screamed and called for help. Yeon-woo enjoyed this spectacle. The events moved back in time to a running competition. There were several girls at the start. Isuri had to run, so she prepared herself and breathed deeply at the top of her lungs. The man gave a sign and the competition began. Isuri was ready. She ran quickly. The girl was giving it her all. The coach supported them from the stands. The girl was in front, running as fast as she could. There was still a little more to go. And then when the girls reached the finish line, they could relax. They all fell to the ground to rest. Isuri was breathing loudly. Her heart was beating furiously, but even now she did not show her emotions. The scoreboard showed the best results. The events moved to the locker room. A friend was telling Isura how cool it was that their class was going to Sela because her classmates had never been there. Isuri remained silent and did not answer the question whether she would also go. And then the girl came out and said she hadn't decided yet. She added that she had no close friends anyway. The events returned to real time, where the soldier was swimming in a river with monsters. They sailed straight to him on Yeon-woo's orders. The man climbed out and shouted to the boy to help him. The guy turned and looked at this crazy man who was begging for help. The soldier said that he had saved Yeonwoo when they first met and helped him find friends. The monsters were almost near the man. He stood on the pier and begged for help. But Yeonwoo did not listen and kept walking, and Isuri ordered him to leave. The guy said that there was no need to run away because he would not do it again. He explained that he had been using monsters from the very beginning to kill this madman. And now, there was no danger, and they didn't have to run away. Soyon could barely walk, and Yeonwoo looked at her. He had done all this for her. The guy tried to say something else to Asura, but did not finish. The girl stood there in disbelief, waiting for an explanation. But it turned out that Yeonwoo had sensed the monsters again, and they were not the ones he had summoned. The military came, and these animals attacked them. They tried to repel them with fire. The soldiers were saviors who protected the area near the river. Isuri said to hurry up and go, but Yeonwoo was very sick. He explained that when his emotions intensified, his cells became sensitive and it was somehow transmitted to the monsters. He added that he could feel it when he pointed with his hand. It was like a kind of bond that was forming between them. Yeon-woo closed his eyes as if trying to contact the monsters. Then the water monsters felt it, and one of them reacted. The soldiers were shocked. One of them even fell to the ground. The monster turned and looked back. Yeon-woo stood before him. The monster just looked at the boy, did not go anywhere, and did nothing. Yeon-woo stretched out his hand and looked back at the monster. After that, all the monsters just went back into the water. The soldiers could not believe what they were seeing. They started shooting at them, but the monsters did not react and just went back into the water. Yeon-woo could barely stand up after that. Isuri asked him what he had done. The guy said he didn't know it, but the monsters did what he wanted. But there was one problem. When he did it, he felt as if something was wrong with him. That spot appeared on Yeon-woo's face again. The teenagers had already climbed the mountain and were waiting for them, and Kang Ji-hoon called his classmates. At the same time, they offered Soyon help with her wound. Park Choa looked at her poor classmate and took off her briefcase. She said it was all very strange. After that, she took off her shirt and said that it was she who pushed the soldier. But why did Soyon get hurt? And then, Park Choa gave them a sweatshirt, turned around, and asked them not to look at her so evilly. Soyon asked if she had done something wrong or if no one cared. Suddenly, someone honked at the teenagers and they turned to the sound. It was a van, and it slowed down when it approached the teenagers. The window went down and there were bloggers there. The guy called them all over. The company looked at each other, but there was no other way out. They all got in the car and drove to the place where the bloggers were taking them. The blogger asked if they had seen these new monsters yet, and then he said that he saw a soldier pointing a weapon at them. The teenagers were surprised by this. He smiled and asked if they hadn't gotten it yet. It turned out that a blogger had filmed them, everything that was happening on the river. Moreover, it was a broadcast for his blog and others saw it all. The blogger said that thanks to his viewers, he helped them. And then he asked if the teenagers had asked him why he was helping them. But Kang Ji-hoon said that the boy hadn't done anything special. Isuri simply thanked him for his help and asked him to take them to Cannes. The blogger asked what happened in that city and asked if they were all non-locals. But Isuri said not to ask too many questions. The guy quickly agreed. Then the blogger continued to broadcast and tell the audience something. The bridge, which was completely clogged with cells and eggs, became clean. It looks like the soldiers did their best. So-young and Yeon-woo sat next to each other and were silent. And then the guy started talking. He said that So-yeon was already recently wounded, but the girl did not let him finish and said that everything was fine. She asked us not to talk about it now and added that it would be easier to forget the incident, because they were all on equal footing now. Now Yeon-woo interrupted her. He thanked Seo-young. He recalled how the girl threw herself at the soldier so that he would not shoot Yeonva. The guy thanked us again for our help. So-yeon said that Yeon-woo had saved her many times before, so it was nothing. Suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes. Everyone flew forward. No one held back because there were too many people. The blogger leaned out the window and asked what happened. It turned out that the entire road was covered with these cells. Then the driver got out of the car, taking a flamethrower with him, and was going to burn all the cells. Yeon-woo was wary. He didn't like what was happening. He saw that the guy had opened fire on the eggs. He stood up and shouted that there was no need to burn them. The guy with the flamethrower stalled. Monsters began to crawl out of the water. They came because their cells were being destroyed. The guy got into the car scared and screamed. But there were a lot of monsters. They came out very quickly, like ants. Soyon screamed in fear. Yeon-woo swore, and this alerted Soyon. He ordered her not to get out and stay in the car. Meanwhile, the monsters were getting closer. They were almost near the car. The blogger shouted that there were a lot of them. Suddenly, he stopped talking because he saw something. It was Yeon-woo who just got out of the car. Kang Min and Kang Ji-hoon shouted to the boy that it was very dangerous and he should go back. Soyeon sat in a stupor and did not know what to do. The blogger was filming everything for his blog, and the comments said that Yeon-woo was suicidal. The monsters attacked the boy like dogs when they saw him. Yeon-woo was worried because there were so many monsters and he was not sure he could handle them. But there was no turning back. The monsters were approaching, and there were only seconds left. Yeon-woo remained calm to avoid showing fear and collect his thoughts. It was a great opportunity for the blogger to increase his reach and gain popularity. The monsters began to beat each other. They attacked their own brothers as if they were fighting for territory. One of them simply attacked the other monster and bit off a part of its body. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo just stood there quietly watching. The teenagers inside could not believe that the monsters had suddenly decided to fight each other. Isuri looked at Yeonwoo and realized that it was all his doing. But she still didn't fully understand it, so she didn't know what was really going on. They saw that Yeon-woo was doing it with his hand. The monsters obeyed him and responded to this connection. Yeon-woo looked at the monster and felt that he was now connected to several at once. For a few seconds he felt it. The monster was moving as Yeon-woo wanted it to. Suddenly the teenager felt something behind him. The monster growled at him from behind. But Yeon-woo stopped him as well. The monster just froze in front of the boy. He was a little nervous because it was his first experience. Yeon-woo looked into the monster's eyes, and it was not so scary now. They still bowed to humans even though they could destroy the entire planet. Now Yeon-woo felt completely different. Not like before, the guy could now simply control them as he wished. And it was all just by the power of thought. Now there were many monsters, even too many. But it was enough to escape and save ourselves. Something incredible was happening in the comments section of the broadcast. Everyone was shocked by what was happening. The blogger incited viewers' reactions with his phrases. Suddenly people started writing in the comments that Yeon-woo was very suspicious. But the blogger said that it was the other way around, and that the guy just had the courage to defend them. And then he asked if the subscribers really believed that Yeon-woo controlled the monsters, because it was impossible. Isuri listened and analyzed. The monsters did not touch the car, so Yeon-woo ran out first. Meanwhile, the blogger recalled the case when Yeon-woo wanted to shoot a soldier. He said that it was also very strange. Isuri realized that this blogger was attracting too much attention and something had to be done about it. The teenagers said that Yeon-woo was an ordinary guy and not suspicious. Suddenly, Isuri spoke about immunity, and the blogger turned to her. She repeated that Yeon-woo was immune. Kang Ji-hoon was shocked that the girl had said that. Isuri explained that the boy told them this himself, that the monsters simply did not touch him and he had no control over them. The blogger was simply shocked by this information and the fact that it would be published in his blog. There was even more activity in the comments, but there were those who did not believe these words. Kang Ji-hoon asked Isuri what she was doing, but she told him to shut up. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo was already on his way back because the monsters were distracted. He opened the door and said it was clear so they could move on. Immediately, the blogger attacked the guy with questions, which surprised Yeonwoo, who did not understand what was happening. The blogger asked for an interview, but we had to hurry. Isuri thought about how Yeon-woo couldn't control the monsters from the car, so she didn't understand why he tried so hard. She couldn't understand why Yeon-woo sacrificed himself for others, since he had been betrayed from the very beginning. At this point, Soyon asked how the boy was feeling. The girl was sincerely worried about her friend and even scolded him for such an act, because he could have died. Yeon-woo apologized and said they didn't have to worry anymore. Isuri listened to their conversation carefully. Suddenly, Yeon-woo felt something again. He immediately went over to take a closer look. Then he shouted for them all to drive fast. But everyone was in a stupor, so Yeon-woo shouted again, this time louder, and ordered them to step on the gas quickly. The car sped off at full speed. Yeon-woo looked back, and meanwhile they finally crossed the Han River. Suddenly, something came out from under the water. Yeon-woo did not understand what this strange feeling was. He felt strange and scared at the same time. He felt that there were even bigger monsters there. The head of that monster was the size of an ordinary monster. Yeon-woo was very scared, and they were all lucky that everything was okay. But they will never return to the Han River again. Meanwhile, events moved to Choi and Hongmi. The man was choosing something and said he didn't know what to do. Hongmi was sitting behind him. The homeless man was hesitating to make a choice. She just looked at the floor and thought about nothing. Suddenly, Choi told her to go get a drink of water. She didn't understand at first and asked again. Then the man repeated that Hongmi's body had not yet fully recovered. In the meantime, he would go look for her friends. The girl stood up. Her body was shaking and she said that everything was fine. She could barely stand up and said she would go with him, because it was dangerous to be alone. Then they rode the motorcycle forward. Hongmi asked why the man was helping her. Choi asked if she didn't trust him, but she said she was just curious and asked how he knew her classmates. The homeless man said it was very noisy and then asked how Hongmi was feeling. The girl apologized and said that everything was fine. Choi noticed this himself, and then he asked if she could really handle it. The man explained that he was homeless and smelled bad. Hongmi exhaled and added that it really did stink. Choi exploded and told her to forget what he said. The girl just smiled and said that she hadn't bathed for a long time, and her hair was dirty, so anyone who saw them would mistake them for father and daughter. My husband missed it and said it was funny. They stopped at an intersection, and Choi asked where they should go next. He told her to wait a bit. The man got off his motorcycle and said he would go check, and if something happened, they would leave immediately. The track was clean, no monsters. Hanmi sighed sadly. She sat down by the pillar and said how much she wanted to meet her classmates. Hanmi couldn't even find her phone. Then a soldier came out from around the corner. He pointed the machine gun and said he had found a schoolgirl. Choi looked at the motorcycle. Something about it seemed strange and familiar. He looked toward the river. It seems that the man recognized the soldier's motorcycle and thought he had come downstairs. Meanwhile, Hanmi was complaining about her pain. She couldn't take it anymore. Her whole body ached. Suddenly, someone recognized her. A smile appeared on this person's face. He stretched out his hand to the girl, and then he asked what Hanmi was doing here, because it was dangerous to be alone. He touched the girl's face when she turned to him. It was Park Min, and the guy immediately asked if she was here to find her classmates. He invited Hanma to go along. Park Min smiled and said that he was going to meet them just then. Meanwhile, Choi went down to the river where the teenagers and the soldier were. He looked around cautiously to avoid running into monsters. The man could not find the soldier. He could not run far. Suddenly, the homeless man saw a body in the water and blood nearby. Choi came closer to get a better look. He noticed that it was clothing and it looked like a military uniform. Choi decided that the man was dead because he was not moving. A person could not have been underwater for that long. Suddenly, the homeless man heard monsters roaring. They were approaching the man. There were a lot of them. Choi was frightened and fell into a stupor. He realized that it was a bait. The man was angry with himself. Why did he even decide to go downstairs? Now he's going to die. Then another monster came out of the water. Choi was surrounded by monsters on all sides, and there was nowhere to run. A giant, ugly monster came out the other side. Homeless Choi realized that he had to run away immediately, when suddenly he noticed something. The monster had something strange in its mouth when it opened it. It was a human eye and a head. Choi was surrounded in a circle from all sides with nowhere to run. The homeless man realized that he was finished. He was trapped. Meanwhile, the military and a man were standing near the bridge. It was Lee Tane. He called the monsters children and said he was going to blow them all up. He asked the monsters if they had heard him. One of the monsters paid attention to him. Lee Tane pointed his hand at the monsters and ordered them to stop suffering nonsense and do a good deed before dying. The man was laughing. He was having fun with everything as usual. It was as if the monster was under hypnosis and followed all the commands. Then, all the monsters just ran away from the homeless man, and Choi was shocked. Suddenly, someone ordered the man not to make any unnecessary movements. He turned his head and saw soldiers pointing their guns at him and saying that they would have to shoot him if he did not listen to them. Hanmi shouted to him from the bridge and asked if he was okay. The man looked at the girl and it calmed him down a bit. Hanmi said she had found her friends. She tried to tell me that she had met her classmate and had to go with him because he knew where their friends were. Lee Tane listened to all this and analyzed her words. Then he turned to Hanmi. He asked the girl if she had come into contact with the monster by accident. Meanwhile, the teenagers continued to drive in the car. The blogger asked his followers if they would like to check out Yeonwoo. Suddenly, the guy got scared of something. The blogger asked him how he learned about his immunity and whether the monster had touched him. This interrogation scared Yeon-woo even more. Isuri said how stupid the teenager was for putting himself in the public eye. She seemed to be angry with the guy, and then added that he should take better care of himself and get himself examined. But Yeon-woo told the blogger that he was indeed immune. And then, the guy said that he found out about it by accident, when the monsters started avoiding him and he didn't touch the eggs. Kang Min noticed that his friend Kang Ji-hoon was sad. He asked his opinion about it and said it sounded like a bluff, but Kang Ji-hoon said he didn't know. And then he asked me to leave him alone, adding that he really didn't like it. Kang Min asked if this state was not caused by Hanmi and the fear that she was dead. The guy exploded and yelled, but the friend didn't stop. He asked if Kang Ji-hoon believed the soldier because Kang Min felt deceived. The teenager looked down and said sadly that he did not know. Suddenly, someone called out to the blogger. It was Isuri. She told them to drive faster and look ahead at the road. They drove up to a place where there was a traffic jam and a lot of cars. Soldiers stood there and inspected everyone. The teenagers were halfway through. The blogger told his followers everything, and it seemed to last for a long time because he was under control. Isuri said that this was exactly what she was afraid of. She added that she should behave as usual. She hoped that it was a regular patrol and that they would not check too much. She told everyone not to panic, to just watch what they do with the other cars. Sung-yeon asked what happened and whether they could not pass. Park Cho noticed Seo-young, who looked very bad. She asked the girl how she felt. Soyon was silent and just looked at her classmate. Her face was pale and wet. Park Choa said something about this and asked if it would have been better to give So-young medicine, but the girl said that the pain was tolerable. In fact, it was not like that. So-yeon could barely cope with it, but she was angry that she was the only one with such a problem. She thought that someone like her was destined to die a long time ago, and it really annoyed her. Meanwhile, their turn came, and the soldiers stopped the car. The bloggers opened the windows and greeted the man, saying they wanted to get to the other side. The soldier said that the road was under control and ordered them to turn the car around, as instructed. But the bloggers said they should immediately take cover. But the soldier said that there were too many people there, and then stopped talking for a second. He was shocked that there were so many people inside. The blogger said that there were only 9 of them and they were all his brothers and sisters. Then the soldier said he would check their car. More soldiers came up to them and told them that these were quarantine rules and ordered them to roll down the window. The soldiers put their guns to the windows. The teenagers behaved calmly and did not show any signs of distress. Suddenly, the man noticed something. He pointed to Soyon, who was holding her wound with her hand and looked bad. He pointed at her and said that the girl was infected. Soyon was scared and shivering. They began to defend her and prove the opposite. They swore that Soyon just broke her arm and honestly had no contact with the monsters. Then she was taken to a shelter and provided with medical assistance. Her arm was rewound. The medic said it was a gunshot wound, but he didn't see anything suspicious, so the girl should be released. The man was very nice and wished Soyon a speedy recovery. The girl was polite and thanked the doctor. She came out of the tent, but suddenly Soyon stopped. The girl turned and looked at the men who helped her. After that, Soyon decided to go back inside. She began her uncertain conversation and the men turned to her. Soyon apologized for everything that happened. She looked down and was as unhappy as possible. The girl said that it was very painful for her, so she did not want to do it. Then there was a short pause. Soyeon asked them to let them out of Seoul, adding that it was very difficult for her. She said she really wanted to get better and then she just cried. The girl looked so bad that you wanted to feel sorry for her. She begged and looked them straight in the eye. 2 grown men could not resist the child. Meanwhile, the others were still sitting in the car, and when they saw their friend, they became more animated. The girl was next to a soldier, so everyone thought something had happened. The soldier stood in front of the car and wrote something on a piece of paper. Then, he put it in the car and said it was a permit to leave and ordered me to put the piece of paper on the windshield. The soldier said that it was very difficult to leave Seoul now, but they would help them. The man said that they had to turn left in 300 meters. Meanwhile, Soyeon crept up to the car window. She knocked on the door and the girl looked very happy. The soldier radioed that a car was coming and opened the barrier. And the car with the teenagers just drove by quietly. They will finally get home and leave Seoul. Everyone in the car was shocked and became very animated, pouncing on Soyeon with questions. The girl was all smiles and said that she had just shown her tears to 2 grown men and that was it. Sung-yeon hugged Seo-young, saying it was cool. Everyone was incredibly happy. Kang Min shouted that they would finally get out of this cursed Seoul, but Kang Ji-hoon ordered him to shut up. Kang Min ignored his friend and told Seo-young that she was a great sport. Seon-young said she was going to start crying. Everyone had been waiting for this moment for so long, and it had finally come. Suddenly, she noticed something on her phone and it changed her expression. She showed the others the correspondence on her phone. Her voice sounded very excited. She pointed and shouted enthusiastically. Sung-yeon called out Lee Hong-mi's name. Kang Ji-hoon immediately turned to the girls. She showed me her correspondence with Park Min, and he sent a photo of Lee Hong-mi. It was definitely her. The military checked her. There was a lot of blood on Hong-mi's t-shirt, but the main thing was that she was alive. It was just incredible. The bloggers got out of the car and stood near the border while the teenagers were talking on the phone. Song-yeon dialed Park Min. The guy was very friendly, saying he was glad to hear from them. But there were communication problems at the base, so he couldn't talk to them there. Park Min stood by the Han River because there was a good connection there. The guy asked how they were doing and started talking about the fire situation, and they had a bad breakup. But Kang Ji-hoon interrupted him, saying that none of this mattered. He came in with questions about Lee Hong-mi. Park Min started laughing at the boy and asked why he was yelling at him. He liked to annoy Kang Ji-hoon. He said that the teenagers had left the girl alone and he accidentally found her with a homeless man. Park Min then said that he could not believe they had crossed the Han River and reached the hideout, especially in someone else's car. Sung-yeon did not understand what the boy was saying. He congratulated them on their good work. Park Min said that in any case, Lee Hong-mi was injured, and so he would stay with her. And then he asked if the teenagers wanted to go home. In the end, he told his classmates to behave. Then Isuri interrupted the conversation and asked why he was talking like that, adding that they were waiting for him. She said that there was only a little more to go and they would leave this damned Seoul. Isuri told Park Min to take Hong-mi and come to them. But the guy just laughed in response and said that it was much safer here now. And then he added that this was especially true of Yeonwoo. The guy did not expect this. Park Min asked if he needed help. Yeonwoo asked what his classmate meant. He really didn't understand what they were talking about. But Park Min just laughed and said that he knew everything, calling his classmate a bro. He added that he had a friend who could help him. Park Min spoke about Lee Tae-in and said that he was also immune. Yeonwoo's eyes widened dramatically. Park Min assumed that the teenager had been having trouble controlling himself lately. And then he suggested a meeting, because according to him, Lee Tae-in had a lot to tell. After that, Park Min simply disconnected, and only dial tones came from the phone. Sung-yeon was outraged by this act, and asked him how he knew about Yeonwoo. Kang Ji-hoon thought only about his Lee Hong-mi. He didn't listen to what others were saying. The boy came to when the teenagers told Yeonwoo to make up his mind. Isuri was outraged because she did not understand what Park Min was up to, and there was no guarantee that they would successfully cross the Han River. Sung-yeon interrupted the conversation and asked who Isuri was, who decided for them all. She said that she was thinking soberly and critically, and added that if Park Min had planned something, she was not going to go back. Isuri added that this bastard could have done something that he shouldn't have done. She told a story that she found when they were in Namsan. The survivors broke in and asked to open the door. Behind the poor people were monsters. Isuri was hiding behind a wall and breathing loudly because she was running away. People begged for help, but Park Min and Han Song-yu just stood there laughing at them. Sung-yeon stood up and said that it was not true, asking him to go back and find out everything. But Kang Min also intervened and refused. The guy said that Isuri was right and that going back was tantamount to suicide. Kang Min added that they all definitely started something, so it's not profitable for them to go back. At that moment, a blogger came in and asked if they had finished all the negotiations. And then he asked if they were going further. Then Yeon-woo spoke and shouted to me to wait. He lowered his tone a bit and asked me to politely wait a little longer. Isuri was furious at the teenager's behavior. She couldn't believe that Yeon-woo was really going to wait for him. But the guy was thinking about his own. The information that there was someone else with immunity did not give him peace of mind. He had to figure it out. Isuri looked at Yeonwoo and could not believe that he was really going to meet Park Min. The blogger pushed Yeonwoo and told him to think fast if he wanted to leave. He realized that he had no other choice. Then Soyon intervened in the conversation. She offered to follow Hanmi together if he wanted to. Isuri was now annoyed with Soyon as well. The girl said she was shocked. And then she asked Yeonwoo if he felt sorry for So-young. She added that the girl was in bad condition, very bad. And then she turned and looked at Yeonwoo, asking if he wanted to ruin everything, because So-yeon's wounds were very serious. But the girl began to defend herself and said that she was fine. The blogger started pushing them again, saying that he would leave and they had to decide. Isuri turned to Yeonwoo once again, ignoring the blogger. She asked if the teenager would torment the wounded Soyon. Meanwhile, events moved to the other side of the Khan River. The soldier pointed a thermometer at the homeless man to measure his temperature. Everything was fine. Then the man asked if Choi was sure he hadn't come into contact with the monsters. At that moment, someone called out to the man. It was Lee Hong-mi. She was given a white suit and waved to the homeless man. She stretched out her hands wearing special gloves. Han-mi was sincerely delighted with her brother. She was so positive. She told Choi that it looked great on him, and then asked why they took his temperature. But the homeless man ignored her question and ordered her to pretend that she knew everything. Han-mi didn't understand what he meant and asked him again. The man told me to stay with him and not to go anywhere else, because it was the safest place to be right now. Hong-mi agreed, because the soldiers were busy with their work anyway, and then suggested that they tell the others that Choi was her uncle. Meanwhile, the trucks arrived. The soldiers ordered people in white suits to get into them, but they were in no hurry and asked where they would be taken. Lee Hong-mi intervened and asked them to come too. She said they really needed to go to the other side. Choi told the girl to be careful because when he was there, the monsters were huge. Suddenly, the girl understood something when the homeless man said that you never know if a person has been infected. Hanmi agreed with this opinion. She did not know if she had ever been in contact with monsters. She recalled the conversation with Lee Tian when he asked her if she had contact with monsters. Lee Tian explained that he was a medical student and tried to help people in the shelter. He pointed to the girl's wound, asking if a monster had done this to her because it looked painful. Lee Tian smiled and added that she would be killed if she was infected and advised her to be smarter. He said that Hanmi could have turned to him for help. She thought about it seriously because she didn't want to become a monster. She was distracted from her bad thoughts by Choi, who asked what she was thinking about. And then, the homeless man made sure that Hanmi wore the costume well everywhere, so that nothing was exposed. The girl smiled at him and pretended that everything was fine. And then Hanmi apologized and said she had to meet her friends and went to the trucks. A soldier was watching them from around the corner. He was waiting for Choi to be alone. After that, the man crept up on him carefully from behind. And then he called out. Choi returned. The soldier ordered me to follow him. It looked quite strange and suspicious. The homeless man had no choice but to follow him. The soldier led him to a dead end, where there was no one else, just them. Choi asked where they were going and why, but the man remained silent and only turned to the homeless man. Suddenly, Choi felt a sense of danger. He didn't understand anything, but his gut told him that nothing good was going to happen. The soldier turned away, and then Choi realized that it was time for him to leave. Then, the man said he was glad that the homeless man was okay. After he took off his helmet, Choi was shocked. It turned out that it was a squad leader. The homeless man said he thought they would never meet again, and then he asked if he had found a military shelter. The man paused as if he was searching for the right words. At the time, he said he was glad that Choi hadn't gotten there yet. The homeless man was shocked and did not understand what was happening and what the soldier was trying to do. The man said that it was not just Seoul that was infected. There was no shelter, because the whole country was infected. Choi could not believe his ears. Then the soldier addressed him as a teacher. He said that he invited the homeless man here for another reason. He wanted to ask for help. The soldier spoke slowly and paused between sentences, making it clear that this conversation was very important and serious. The man said that there were people with immunity among the civilians. The soldier asked if Choi knew anything about it. Meanwhile, the events moved to the Kan River. Park Min told Lee Tae-in that he had talked to his friends. The man was interested and a smile appeared on his face. He seemed to be hoping for Yeonwoo. Park Min did not answer right away, as if he was afraid of disappointing Lee Tae-in. But in the end, he said that he thought that no one would probably come back except for one guy. It turned out that this guy was Kang Ji-hoon. He left the car and his classmates behind. But Park Choa followed him, and he asked her why she followed them, but she told him to close up. Lee Tae-in asked Park Min where everyone was or if they were deliberately late. But the guy was very calm and told me not to worry. He was sure that his classmates would come. It was because of what they wrote to him. It turned out that Park Min told Yeonwoo that his parents were here. They were dressed in special white suits and were here with everyone. They were the ones who were put in the truck and transported. Yeon-u was shocked by what he read. His heart was racing. He realized that this was not good and his parents were in danger. Events moved back in time when Park Min received a call from Yeonwoo's parents. At first, the guy didn't realize what kind of unfamiliar number it was. But when Yeonwoo's mother introduced herself, the teenager was not very pleased. He spoke without enthusiasm and said that he could not reach his classmate either. He also added that Yeonwoo was in the hideout with him. Suddenly, the teenager's parents said something that made Park Min happy. They said they were in Seoul. Meanwhile, events returned to the present. Trucks have crossed the bridge. Yeonwoo's mother was on the floor with her father by her side. The woman was breathing loudly and moaning in pain. When my father saw what happened to his wife, he immediately went to look for a cure. It turned out that the mother had a severe wound on her leg and could not walk normally. A man scolded his wife for overdoing it and ordered her to stay still. Tears gathered in her eyes while her father continued to scold her for walking 20 kilometers without rest. Suddenly, the woman just got up and left, telling the man to stop it. She walked away from her husband and was silent, turning her back. And then, after a short pause, she turned and said that her husband had to know how important Yeonwoo was to her. He immediately changed in his face. It looked like there was some kind of secret there. After that, the woman picked up the phone and said that she was fine now. But her son didn't pick up the phone, and she couldn't find a place to go because she didn't know if he was okay. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was my mother's phone. She immediately picked up the phone and started talking very excitedly. She barely uttered a word, giving away information about their whereabouts. It turned out that she was talking to Park Min, and he was approaching these people. And so, finally, they all met. The teenager pretended to be a kind and decent guy, politely greeted and introduced himself as Yeon-woo's classmate. The parents were happy to see Park Min because they had hoped to see their son. Then, Yeon-woo's mother approached the teenager and squeezed his hands. And then she thanked Park Min for coming. The mother looked very exhausted and pitiful, screaming of grief. She said she was very happy that the boy was safe. Park Min thanked them and said they were heroes to him. After all, Yeon-woo's parents came here, but Park Min's parents would never have done that for him. He knew that. Yeon-woo's parents tried to change his mind, but he was unwilling. After that, Park Min said he had come to tell him something. He said that he had just contacted his other classmates and thought that Yeon-woo was with them. The boy added that his classmates were fine and safe. The parents were shocked by this. When the mother heard that her son was on the other side of the bridge, she was overjoyed. She threw herself into her husband's arms, and it was hard to even stand. The woman started crying and thanking Park Min, and her father calmed her down. While the parents were not looking, the teenager's expression changed and became familiar, and he just waited for the adults to speak up. Afterward, Park Min's phone rang. He pretended to be friendly and politely greeted Seung-yong. From the other end of the phone, he yelled at Yeon-woo and called him a bastard. Park Min's expression changed, as if he hadn't expected to hear it. Yeon-woo was shouting into his phone and asking him what he was up to, because it was all for a reason. Then, Park Min called out Yeon-woo's name loudly so that the parents behind him could hear him. The mother was shocked when she heard the name of her son, whom she had not been able to contact for so long. Yeon-woo told Park Min to give him a straight answer before he finished him off. He wanted to know what his classmate meant when he said that Yeon-woo's parents were there. Park Min spoke with a lot of airs, as if they were old friends. He asked Yeon-woo to calm down and wait a minute. Then the teenager's mother spoke into the phone. Yeon-woo was shocked. He did not expect his mother to be there. She and his father immediately started asking questions about how their son felt and whether he had been injured anywhere. But Yeon-woo didn't seem to like it. At one point, he exploded and rudely asked why my parents had come here. Yeon-woo scolded them for this act, because they did not think about themselves and came to a very dangerous place. The father intervened in the conversation and tried to put his son in his place because it was very rude, and the mother was worried. She began to apologize because she was worried and couldn't get through, so she called a friend's number, from which her son had called. And then the woman asked if he was angry with her. Yeon-woo was furious because it meant that they had met Park Min. The boy tried to pull himself together and asked to pass the phone to his classmate. He was looking at his mother with a sweet and friendly look. Yeon-woo immediately started yelling at him on the phone that he was a scumbag for using his parents, and then he ordered Park Min to stay put. He threatened his classmate with death if something happened to his parents. Park Min did not fall for provocations and asked me not to be angry with him because he just wanted to meet, and he had misunderstood everything. The parents were surprised by this conversation between the boys because they thought they were good friends. Then the mother decided to tell her father about her suspicions. She asked him if it didn't seem strange to him that her child was somewhere out there alone. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo continued to threaten his classmate that he would not go unpunished. He asked Park Min to stop pretending and be honest with him. Yeon-woo asked if he had abandoned them all that day. The boy told him to answer that he had to. Meanwhile, the others sat in the car and watched Yeon-woo talk on the phone. Seung-yeon was outraged because it was her phone. The others just looked at it all with a sideways glance. Soyon was worried, and Isuri looked unhappy. Meanwhile, Park Min told Yeon-woo that he was not done yet. He added that it wouldn't end when they left Seoul because then all hell would break loose. And then Park Min, so that Yeon-woo wouldn't be too wrong. After all, the teenager won't be able to avoid the soldiers for long, and soon the quarantine will become more extensive. This phrase made Yeon-woo's hair stand on end. And then Park said that they had the same goal, and he was not very happy about it either. After that, in a more serious voice reminiscent of the usual Park Min, he suggested that Yeon-woo meet and talk. It turned out that he had a plan. Meanwhile, the others gathered in a circle with Lee Tae and discussed something. Choi stood off to the side, but close by. Lee Tae reassured the newcomers that nothing terrible had happened to them, and that everything was fine. Choi eavesdropped on the conversation and analyzed it. This man seemed very suspicious and unreliable even without information about his immunity. Choi recalled the words of that soldier. He said that there was a person with immunity. The man said that he was a young medical student studying abroad, and he asked the homeless man to follow him. Lee Tae used his experience in medicine to help the survivors and medical personnel. But this man was behaving very suspiciously. The soldier recalled a time when they met in a city and half of the soldiers were killed. Even then, he thought it was very strange and could not believe it as he looked around the area. There were no external attacks on the bodies, only internal infection. Everything was obvious because the infection was massive and this could not have happened during the quarantine. Choi could not believe what he was hearing. The homeless man had never thought of such a thing before. The soldier told a story about when he arrived at the shelter and there was a young man there. They came by ambulance, and there was a man who had a heart attack. But the military man still could not understand one thing: how so many people could be infected at once. The man told Choi to be careful because it was unclear how the infection had spread. The homeless man watched Lee Tien and wondered if it was possible to get infected with the antivirus suit. Suddenly, Lee Hong-mi appeared behind him, frightening the man. She just wanted to know what he was doing. She apologized but asked again what the man was doing. Choi said it was okay and asked her to leave, but Hong-mi didn't want to. She added that he was her uncle now because she told everyone that. And then Lee Hong-mi asked him again who he was following. Once again, Choi answered indifferently. The girl realized that he was following Lee Tien and told the homeless man about it. And then she asked if Choi wanted to get medicine from him. The homeless man was shocked and asked how Hong-mi knew about him, to which she replied that he had treated her. Choi exploded with shock and anger. The man asked if Lee Hong-mi was sure that it was Lee Tae. It turned out to be true. Then Choi pounced on Hong-mi with questions to see if she was okay. The girl didn't understand what was happening, so she asked if Choi was in pain. Suddenly, the homeless man noticed something downstairs. Lee Hong-mi was holding a bottle of water, and Choi asked where she got it. She happily replied that Lee Tae had given it to her. At that moment, Choi's body shivered. He was scared of what this medical student was doing. Meanwhile, the events moved to the Khan River Bridge. Soldiers were walking along it. There were abandoned cars and smoke and fire on the road. The men were looking around for something. A woman asked why it had suddenly become so quiet, as she was not the only one who felt it. They reassured her, saying that she shouldn't panic because they were here. A huge monster began to crawl out from behind the bridge. The soldier felt a big shadow over him. It was very strange. Suddenly, a giant monster climbed above them, 10 times bigger than the ones they had slain before. One of the soldiers turned around, sensing danger, and froze in shock. A huge monster growled at them. Its head alone was the size of a soldier. Meanwhile, the events moved back in time. Isuri stood around the corner of the wall and looked somewhere. It turned out that she was looking at the door of a room where a large number of people were breaking in. Behind them was a monster that was already beginning to devour the victims, and they were all running away from it. One man was the first to be defeated and screamed, frightening the others. Han Xiongyu and Park Min just kept walking, ignoring the screams coming from Namsan Tower. People thought they were dead because the doors would not open. Suddenly, someone shouted at them to wait. It turned out that it was Isuri. She ran to these people, saying that she would help them. She sincerely wanted to help them and save them, but she froze when she saw the amount of danger in front of her. She would not be able to control who went inside. At that moment, when she stood in front of the closed door, Isuri realized everything. People were shocked because they thought they were about to be rescued and let in. But Isuri just turned around and left because it was unreasonable to take risks to save others. Her mother yelled bad words at her back and called her names, but the girl just kept walking, not paying attention. It's cruel, but it's a fact. In the meantime, the events had moved into reality. Yeon-woo finished speaking and walked back to the car. The blogger was enthusiastically filming his subscribers on his phone and saying that it was impossible. He was amazed that Yeon-woo was going to walk back to the Han River. The blogger asked him what it was all about. The teenager's mind echoed with the words of Park Min, who offered to meet and talk because he had a plan. Yeonwoo was angry at his classmates' arrogance, but he couldn't help it because the most valuable thing was at stake: his parents. Meanwhile, bloggers were discussing their channel and how they were doing. Suddenly, someone started to get out of the car and shouted at everyone to get out of the way. It turned out that it was Isuri who came out rudely. She was aggressive. Kangmin yelled after her to stop and not go anywhere. Then Yeon-woo grabbed Isuri's hand. He asked her to stay here in the car because Yeon-woo didn't want her to risk her life. Isuri only asked the same question in response: why the teenager was going to go into danger himself. Yeon-woo said it was because of his parents. and then asked if Isuri could wait for him in the car. But the girl only exhaled heavily in response. And then she turned and looked at Yeonwoo with her stony gaze. Then she asked me how this concerned her, because it wasn't even her parents. Yeonwoo started to say something, but he was interrupted by Sung-yeon, who ordered him to stop. The girl asked how long they would have to wait for everyone. Sung-yeon called Isuri a queen and added that she was impossible to please. But the girl was not in the mood and turned to her classmate who was insulting her. Isuri gave him a killer's gaze and ordered Seon-young to watch his tongue. Otherwise, she threatened to rip it out with her bare hands. Sung-yeon exploded and yelled at Isuri, threatening her, which didn't scare her at all. Kang-min intervened and told the bully to stop, because she knew that Isuri hated being called that. But she had already walked away from the car, not listening to this empty talk any longer. Then Kang-min said that he would follow her and persuade her to return, and ordered the others to go ahead. Meanwhile, events moved to the other side of the river. Kang Ji-hoon and Park Choa walked along the road to the shelter, but kept their distance from each other. Suddenly, the girl said how sorry she was to see it. She added that they were jerks who came back for nothing. Park Choa told Kang Ji-hoon to look at these poor people, because only people who were sick in the head went to the Han River. Then a classmate asked why she was following him. She replied that it would be fun to be together. Park Joa asked if he didn't like her company. But Kang Ji-hoon was thinking about something else entirely. He recalled how he first saw Hanmi's body and thought she was dead. Kang Ji-hoon could not understand anything. He had checked the girl's breathing so many times, and she definitely wasn't breathing then. Now the guy just couldn't believe it. Perhaps all these events had also affected him, because Hanmi was really alive. Meanwhile, soldiers at the border noticed the teenagers. They stopped them and ordered them to go through the control zone. The soldier added that she was on the other side, but suddenly stopped talking. Something did not allow him to finish. Park Choa shouted at Kang Ji-hoon because he did not answer her questions or even respond to the soldiers. Suddenly, the teenager realized that he was too deep in his thoughts and turned to Park Choa. The soldier pointed his weapon at the teenagers and shouted that he had ordered them to pass the control zone. The girl immediately apologized. Park Choa grabbed Kang Ji-hoon's head and told the soldier that he was just in shock and that something would be back soon. The soldier let them through and ordered them to be careful in the future, especially the boy. When the teenagers left, Park Choa turned to see if a soldier was following them. And then she hit Kang Ji-hoon and yelled at him for such irresponsible behavior. The guy apologized and then asked if he could ask Park Choa for a favor. The girl was in a stupor because the topic had changed abruptly, and she hadn't told this idiot everything yet. Meanwhile, the events moved to the other side of the bridge, where there were trucks. People in suits talked about some children they had gone to look for, but they never got in touch. At that moment, Lee Hong-mi was sitting on the ground, thinking about her own. She didn't really listen to what was going on around her. Suddenly, someone called out to her and asked what she was doing. It was Park Min. He asked the girl why she was alone. Lee Hong-mi became cheerful again. A slight smile appeared on her face. Meanwhile, Park Choa was talking to Hanmi on the phone. She said that she really wanted to see them all. Park Choa replied that they were in a safe place but would meet soon. Hanmi didn't really understand what had happened because Park Choa said she wanted to talk to her. Suddenly, she heard her name. This voice was so familiar and close, but at the same time stunning. Meanwhile, Kang Min followed the stubborn Isuri and asked how far she was going to go. The guy was indignant, and Isuri asked him back if she had taken all the fire extinguishers and food. Kang Min devalued her feelings by asking if Isuri really left because Sung-young mentioned her school nickname. At this point, the girl turned and looked at her classmate with a fierce, angry look. He started to apologize right away, but Isuri simply replied that it wasn't because of Sung-yeon. And then she turned around, saying that Park Min had shown up. Then she asked why Kang Min was following her. In response, the guy asked if it was all because of Lee Yeon-woo, and then offered to just talk. Kang Min added that nothing would happen if Yeon-woo met with Park Min. Isuri just exhaled heavily, adding that the teenager hadn't understood anything and had simply wasted his time following her all this way. Kang Min did not understand and asked if she was serious. And then he added that in the future, it would be hard for Isura to be alone. He said that as soon as the quarantine ended, many people would leave this place. And that meant only one thing. Isuri interrupted her classmate, saying that she understood everything and that the government already knew everything. None of the infected will be able to leave Seoul, and it is only a matter of time before the virus spreads outside the city. Soon the infection will be lower in Seoul, because all the defense is concentrated there and this city will become safer than others. Then the girl turned and asked me that even if the whole country was infected, how soon would there be a noise about the cleanup of Seoul? Isuri mentioned Yeonwoo, and then said that they should be prepared for future survival training. Suddenly, Kang Min interrupted her and said that it was not Isuri who was speaking. He added that he did not think so now, and then he asked if Isuri remembered what Kang Min had said earlier. He recalled the treatment of cancer with high temperatures, and then added that most viruses were simply afraid of heat. If they died at 40 degrees, then in theory they could be neutralized in hot weather. If only they knew the exact temperature that was their weak point, then everything would be easier. And then Kang Min added that they had a test subject. He meant a person with immunity. Suddenly, he changed loudly and said that if they could sting the Yeonwoo infection, they would have a chance. Meanwhile, terrible things were happening on the bridge near the Kan River. People were scared and taking pictures of everything that was happening. A huge monster was growing before our eyes on the bridge. The military shouted at civilians for taking pictures and ordered them to get in the car. Lee Tae stood behind me and talked to one of the soldiers, and then he gave him something. The guy was calm and silently watched what the soldier would do with what he gave him. The soldier just nodded and left. He went into the tent, and then the man turned abruptly because he noticed something. But the soldier just imagined it, and everything was clear. After that, he poured what Lee Tae had given him into a glass of water. Then he took the chopsticks and mixed everything up. The soldier was talking to himself and asked how long he had to do this. The commander was watching him at the time. He saw that the soldier had lifted the lid of the boiler which contained the water that everyone was drinking. Then the commander asked him what he was doing with the water. The soldier was caught red-handed. He immediately drew his weapon and wanted to attack. But the commander expected this, so he repelled the attack and threw the weapon out of the enemy's hands. The soldier fell to the ground and groaned. He turned to say that it hurt, but suddenly fell silent. The commander took his weapon and pointed it at the man, ordering him to tell what he had just done. But the soldier remained silent, so the commander asked him again what the plan was, this time in a ruder tone. The man was scared and said that the commander simply misunderstood everything. Then he just went crazy, screamed, and swung to start a fight. Then the soldier finally broke down and said that it was the senior sergeant. The commander stopped. He was shocked. The soldier repeated that it was an order from a senior sergeant. The soldier went on to say that it was a drug, and the senior sergeant ordered him to help the guy and pour it into the water. The commander was simply shocked by this information and could not believe his ears. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon was talking to Lee Hong-mi on the phone. He asked if she was okay. She still couldn't get over the fact that Kang Ji-hoon had spoken to her, and he had called her himself. The guy moved away from Park Cho a little bit because he was a little shy and said that he just wanted to know how Lee Hong-mi was feeling. Park Choa looked at the guy sideways, but it was clear that she was not happy about it. Lee Hong-mi, meanwhile, was about to cry. Tears gathered in her eyes, and she said that everything was fine. And then she asked back if Kang Ji-hoon was okay. Her voice trembled and gave away. The boy asked why Han-mi was crying, and the girl was afraid of this question. She began to quickly wipe away her tears and said she hadn't been crying. And then she said that Kang Ji-hoon could have avoided waiting for them and just moved. Lee Hong-mi added that Park Min told her that he didn't have to wait for them. After all, the military were there and they would protect them. And then Han-mi started saying something intermittently, with pauses. She was trying to say that if something happened to her, but Kang Ji-hoon interrupted her and said that was enough. And then he simply asked if Han-mi wanted anything to eat. He said that when they got home, they would eat pork, and then suggested that they go to that tteokbokki stand again. After that, Kang Ji-hoon said that he remembered the dish from the restaurant and asked if Han-mi remembered it. Of course, she remembered it. She said that Kang Ji-hoon was choosing something on purpose to please her. The guy replied that Han-mi should stop and just wait for them. At that moment, she heard a soldier order everyone to get into the cars. Suddenly, Lee Hong-mi noticed something and screamed loudly in fear. She saw a huge monster coming at them all. Fear and chaos were also created by the people themselves, who were screaming and saying that they would all be killed by the monster. Other monsters began to emerge from the water and attack the military and civilians. The military opened fire on them, giving the command to other soldiers. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon was shouting at Lee Hong-mi on the phone and asking what was going on. Park Choa realized that something was wrong and asked Kang Ji-hoon about it. But the teenager turned silently to her. His face said it all. Meanwhile, the military fought back as best they could against the monsters, which it was not clear how to defeat. They did not even understand where these monsters could have come from. The monsters did not care about fire and shooting. The spirit of the military was falling before our eyes because they did not know how to cope with these giants. Another soldier noticed that the monsters were attacking in groups and said they had to run away. Meanwhile, in the tent, the commander heard screams and sounds of shooting and returned to see what had happened. He was shocked to see everything in flames and smoke, and the soldiers were just running back, screaming. The commander came closer and did not understand what was happening. The soldier who was almost killed realized that this was his moment to save himself. He stood up and tried to escape, but the commander noticed. Then the soldier grabbed the glass with the substance he had mixed. The commander shouted at him for doing it, after which the soldier just took the whole glass and drank it. He ran up to the poor man and asked what he had just drunk. The man began to cough and make characteristic sounds. After clearing his throat, the soldier said it was an anti-cancer medicine. And then he added that the guy with the red hair said that it prevented cell proliferation. The commander said that the man had just gone crazy and asked him again why he had drunk it, to which he was told that it was better that way than to die without doing anything. Then they heard screams that were right next to them and interrupted the conversation. At the entrance to the tent, a soldier fell to the floor, and a monster was approaching him. He was not alone and was aggressive. The other two soldiers took up arms and shot at the monster. The commander asked how much more ammunition they had, and then he added that if the shots did not pierce their exterior, they should have been able to aim at their mouths. At that moment, the monster caught fire, and a soldier from below opened fire on it. It literally saved the men. The commander asked the soldier if he could stand up, and then ordered him to report the situation. The soldier stammered and said that the monsters came out of nowhere, and there was a whole flock of them on the bridge, all of them suddenly attacking them as if on command. The military fired back as best they could at the monsters. They reacted quickly and drove away from the danger, fighting off the monsters. There were fewer supplies and less hope, because these creatures were very resilient. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon and Park Choa ran as fast as they could. He wanted to see Lee Hong-mi more than anything else in the world, so he ran to protect his girlfriend. Park Choa asked why the girl hung up and tried to dial again, but Han-mi didn't answer. Kang Ji-hoon said he didn't know what happened, but he definitely heard gunshots. So nothing good happened for sure, and they were in danger. Suddenly, the teenagers stopped and stared with wide-open, surprised eyes. Park Choa froze, and all she could manage were short words. On the bridge, they saw a huge monster approaching the place where Lee Hong-mi was. At that moment, the teenagers heard the sounds of a car horn, and they returned. It turned out to be a car of bloggers, and they came back for their classmates. Kang Ji-hoon asked how they got here, but Yeon-woo told him to get in the car quickly because there was no time to explain. At that time, the blogger screamed because he saw a monster. The monster really looked terrifying and frightening because its size was impressive. The blogger said he had never seen such monsters before. Kang Ji-hoon then shouted at him to step on the gas, and then added that he himself said he wanted content. The teenager added that something was definitely happening there, as he called Lee Hong-mi and heard gunshots. Jeon-woo's blood froze in his veins because his parents were on that bridge. He cursed and covered his head with his hands. The guy was confused and did not know what to do. The feelings of fear and hopelessness took over. His thoughts were confused and he could not figure out what to do. Then, someone touched Jeon-woo. It turned out to be Soyon. She told her classmate in a sweet voice not to worry so much. The girl looked at him with her innocent gaze and assured him that his parents were fine. After all, they were with the military. Jeon-woo wondered how So-young could know that he was worried about his parents if he didn't say it out loud. Suddenly, the teenager had that strange but familiar feeling. He turned sharply to look around and understand what had triggered it. Jeon-woo was looking at the bridge, not the monster. The teenager felt déjà vu. He looked at the car rushing across the bridge, and Jeon-woo realized that it was that man. There were soldiers in the truck who were fighting off the monsters that were chasing them, and behind him was Lee Tae. He thought that he hadn't expected to meet the guy in the white cap in such circumstances. A smile appeared on his face. Lee Tae was shocked because he hadn't even thought that a cell could be enlarged to such a size. The man seemed to be talking to Yeon-woo and asked if he felt it too. This monster has evolved much more than its other species. Lee Tae's point was that if he killed this giant monster, others would be afraid of him. Then, the man said out loud to the soldiers that he wanted them to help him suddenly attack the Kan River. The commander was sitting in the truck, and he clearly understood Lee Tae's request. Meanwhile, the monsters could not get even a meter away. They were catching up and were not afraid of shots. The trucks were carrying civilians, and the military were defending them. People in the cars were screaming and panicking because the soldiers themselves could not organize themselves and were shouting at each other. Civilians did not understand what they were doing and feared that such irresponsibility would not protect them. Park Min was silent, but he was scared. In his own mind, suddenly the man at the window screamed. He told everyone to look at that animal. The monster crossed the bridge and began to swim toward them, as if it was faster that way. Park Min was even more frightened. He thought that he was completely safe with the military and Lee Tae-in. The teenager recalled being told that the developmental stages of monsters were divided into higher and lower ones. Lee Tae-in said at the time that over time the difference between the strong and the weak would be visible, and they were afraid of this division. After that, the man laughed again and asked if it was true that the strong devoured the weak. Meanwhile, Park Min received a phone call. He couldn't hear well because of the noise around him. It seemed that Lee Tae-in was talking to him and asked about Yeon-woo. Park Min didn't have time to answer because he was interrupted and called an asshole, ordering him to contact the teenager immediately. Park Min said he was going to call him, but he thought to himself that the bastard was talking to him as a subordinate. Meanwhile, the truck driver noticed something on the road. It turned out that it was a monster that seemed to have come out of nowhere on the road. The driver turned the steering wheel sharply, and people inside the car were hit. No one expected this, it was just chaos inside. Park Min looked at where they were falling and screamed. After that, there was a loud sound. It happened too fast. A second later, the car was already upside down on the bridge and smoking. Park Min was lying motionless after being hit hard. Suddenly, he heard a sound, and it made him wake up. He saw the monster open the door to the truck with its mouth. Park Min screamed because the monster was too close. It was a life-threatening situation. The monster attacked the military, and there was no one to protect them now. Then Park Min heard a growl from the other side and turned to fear. He saw another monster coming at them from the other side. The teenager was overcome with fear. He did not know what to do and just stood in a stupor. The monster seemed to sense this and growled at him. On the other hand, another monster was approaching, and it was headed for Park Min. The guy shouted for them to stay away and thought that his life would really end like that. The monster roared and opened its mouth. Park Min just stood there, falling to the floor. He was almost crying and could only shout for the monster to leave. But no one listened to him. Then, the monster opened its mouth to simply eat Park Min. Suddenly, he stopped. The teenager covered his face with his hands to avoid seeing this horror and was shaking. Suddenly, he realized that nothing had happened and opened his eyes to look. A hand was stretched out in front of him, ordering the monster to leave. It turned out to be Lee Yeon-woo. He saved Park Min. The monster returned to the teenager, but did not attack anyone. Park Min could not believe what he was seeing, and that he had survived. Yeon-woo ordered the monster again and threatened it with death. The teenager was very confident. There was no fear in his voice anymore. Then Yeon-woo punched Park Min in the face with all his might. The teenager just fell to the floor and looked miserable. Park Min said that he could see that Yeon-woo was better now, but he didn't have time to finish. He was interrupted by Yeon-woo, who ordered him to shut up and threatened to send him to monster food if something happened to his parents. Park Min said that he and Lee Hong-mi were fine, but in his mind, he was shocked that Yeon-woo could also control monsters like Lee Tae-in. Kang Ji-hoon called him an asshole and then asked where the monster was. At that time, the monster reached the bridge and roared loudly. Like Godzilla, he threw himself at cars and overpowered them with his size. It was a truck with Lee Tae-in and others, and they all started being thrown in different directions. His one finger was just tipping over the cars. The monster was critically close. The soldiers fired back, but it seemed to do no harm to the monster. Suddenly, the soldier noticed something unusual. Behind them was the same car with teenagers. The blogger filmed everything for his blog, even though everyone was scared, but the content was good. He commented that up close, the monster was even more terrifying and frightening, about 10 meters high. Kang Ji-hoon set fire to a Molotov cocktail and ordered the driver to get as close as he could. The monster was actually quite close, but it was not enough. Kang Ji-hoon shouted for the driver to just follow the plan, and then everything would work out, as long as he didn't hit anything. The passengers in the truck also noticed the car, but could not figure out who it was. Lee Tae-in looked closely, and he felt something. The man realized that it was him, the guy in the white cap, Yeon-woo. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon threw a cocktail directly at the monster. It was flying, but it was still too far away, and the monster's weapons looked small and tiny. Kang Ji-hoon shouted that it was still too far and he needed more cocktails and a closer distance. He returned to the salon and shouted to Park Seo-young. She was setting fire to the cocktails, but it was too slow. Then Park Choa ordered me to give her this. They were arguing in the car about who else wanted to quit, and the driver opened his mouth wide in fear. The monster turned to them. They were driving too close. The blogger shouted that the monster had noticed them and turned its attention to the car. His paw reached out to them all. The driver began to turn the steering wheel to save himself. It was suicide to drive straight. It all happened too suddenly and quickly, but the driver managed to turn. In the cabin, the teenagers were hit in different directions and no one had time to react. The blogger continued filming and told everyone to hold on tight. Park Min was sitting in the back and heard the orders to follow their plan and flee the place. He didn't like the fact that they just wanted to run away. The teenager recalled their conversation when they rescued him. Kang Ji-hoon called him stupid because they could not stop this giant, and their plan was simply to take the monster away from the other cars, because theirs was faster than the army's. Park Min tried to say something about this monster, but he was interrupted. Yeon-woo said that the monster could be fought with Molotov cocktails, and then he just turned around and left, telling Park Min to continue to be afraid of one monster. The teenager was thinking and seemed angry. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon asked Seo-young for more cocktails. Park Min thought about how terrible his situation was, if even his children didn't blame him for anything, but he could not do anything about it. Meanwhile, Soyon was trying to set another cocktail on fire and was being pushed. Then Park Min simply snatched the cocktail out of Seo-young's hands. He came back and said that eventually, if they don't get better now, they will. Soyon was shocked and did not understand what was happening. Park Min added that this would be tantamount to death. Then he stood up and swung the bottle forward. Yeon-woo and Kang Ji-hoon tried to stop him, and everyone shouted at the madman. The car began to brake sharply. Everything was happening too fast, and I lost control. After that, there was a loud explosion, and the car crashed into the fence of the bridge. The teenagers flew forward. No one could understand what had happened, let alone hold on. The driver hit his head on the steering wheel of the car. Yeon-woo and Kang Ji-hoon were also hit, and the teenager was shaking, but he was coming too. Suddenly, he stood up because he felt something, a very familiar feeling. There was a monster in front of their glass, screaming so loudly that everyone quickly came to their senses. Yeon-woo started shaking everyone to wake up and react quickly. The teenagers screamed because the worst thing happened at that moment. It turned out that the monster had attacked them, breaking the glass with its tentacles. Meanwhile, the truck that escaped from the monster could see what happened to the car in the rearview window. The captain was looking through this window with a chessboard. He could not believe that they were here. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to screams. They were coming from inside the truck, and civilians were screaming. One woman was screaming so hard that she almost lost her voice. It turned out that they were infected inside. A military man and one of the civilians were covered with the virus. The truck driver was suspiciously unresponsive to the shouts and his partner. The captain turned to ask him what was going on, but he didn't finish. The soldier was shaking and behaving strangely, making growling sounds. The captain did not understand and asked his partner again what had happened. Then the soldier shouted for him to help him. His entire face was covered with the virus under the protective mask. The captain saw this and immediately reacted, starting to get out of the car. He literally flew out of the cabin and onto the ground. Outside, he noticed something strange. Lee Tae-in was walking along the highway. He wasn't panicking or scared. Then the soldier called him, and the man returned. The captain pointed his weapon at him and ordered him to stand. He had long suspected this man. Lee Tae-in pretended not to understand and asked what had happened. The soldier spoke seriously and ordered him not to pretend and to tell him everything he knew. Lee Tae-in was silent and then simply asked again, turning around completely. Meanwhile, the monster's tentacles were making their way into the car, and chaos was wreaking havoc inside. The driver of the car was devoured by the monster while the others tried to get out, but the doors would not open. Then the teenagers decided to climb out through the window. Park Choa tried to break it with her foot, but she didn't have much strength. Then Soyon remembered her gavel and ordered everyone to leave. Meanwhile, Park Min stood behind everyone and did not move. He just shook his head and looked at something. The teenager watched the car driver being devoured. He seemed to be numb. And then the guy looked to the side and noticed something. Park Min looked at the lighter that had been left on the seat, and a strange plan came to him. At that moment, the blogger yelled at him and called him a murderer. He began to threaten Park Min and said that he would smash his head in at any convenient moment. Suddenly, the blogger felt something and screamed. It turned out that the car was smoking. There was a gas leak somewhere inside. The blogger smelled it and told everyone to get out immediately because it smelled like gas. It turned out that the car was running on gas. Park Min watched everyone get out of the car, but he stood still and took his time. Meanwhile, the military captain was dealing with Lee Tae and asked if he had infected everyone with water, lying about it being medicine. The commander scolded him because he did not understand his actions and at such a time to kill soldiers. Lee Tae was silent. The man continued to say that they were all trying to survive, and then he claimed that apparently he was also infected. The guy was still silent. The commander was losing his nerve and ordered him to answer immediately. He added that now there was nothing left to hide. Suddenly, Lee Tae just laughed. Again, he apologized and said that he tried his best but failed. The soldier held the bar and did not react to the man's behavior. At that moment, they were interrupted by civilians who were screaming and running away from the car. Lee Tae said that he was more likely just curious. At that moment, he reached out his hand to one of the men. He was hurt and sick and screamed. He didn't fall on his own. They were paralyzed on the road and couldn't move. The soldier shouted for Lee Tae to stop doing it, but inside he couldn't understand how the man had done it. The man smiled and said that now he understood it, that it was his gift, and he had been trying to study the virus all along. He said that knowing that neurons are connected to each other people's cells were stimulated together and activated their own cells. Inhibition of cell proliferation with the help of anti-cancer drugs was used, and then the cells reached the brain. Lee Tae said he knew he could control other cells at will. He added that it felt like controlling someone else's brain. The soldier pointed his assault rifle and ordered me to stop immediately, threatening me. But Lee Tae didn't stop talking and said that he later realized something else. He realized that these cells existed to be controlled. Suddenly, there was an explosion, and black smoke came out of the weapon. Lee Tae's eyes opened wide, and he finally shut up and stopped as he was asked to. The soldier exhaled heavily and swore. The man looked at his clothes. There was a hole in them that was soiled. The commander said not to be offended by him because he had warned him. He added that Lee Tae was to blame for this. The soldier began to blame himself and said that he did not want to shoot him at all. He had no choice. But Lee Tae suddenly asked the man again and was surprised to learn that there was only one bullet. The man's eyes and face became frantic. He added that everything happened so unexpectedly, and he had just told him the whole meaning of everything that was happening. The soldier could not believe his eyes. Lee Tae could not survive. His wound began to heal, and a virus appeared there. The man smiled and ordered me to look. He pointed to civilians and said that they were multiplying incomparably all over the body. The woman was already covered with cells and growled like a real monster. Lee Tae happily noted that the changes were happening very quickly. And then he stretched out his hand and asked if the soldier knew what the last brightest moment was. Suddenly, the two bodies just merged into one. The soldier stood there in a stupor, and Lee Tae had done it all. The man couldn't even move, because he didn't know what to expect from this madman. Right before his eyes, two monsters merged into one. They attacked a soldier. The man realized that it was also Lee Tae's work and started shooting back. Meanwhile, the guy just laughed at the fact that his white clothes were dirty and decided that they should be changed. He turned around to go get some new clothes. And then he laughed again and said that he had a lot of materials. I asked him what other good things he could do while looking at the Han River. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion sound and Lee Tae looked back to see what had happened. A car exploded behind him and the monster attacked him. Meanwhile, the teenagers tried to break the car's windows with their feet. The monster and its eggs were getting into the car more and more. The teenagers panicked because they could not get out of there. Sung-yeon was screaming and begging for something to be done. The monsters entered the car. They had a matter of seconds. In the end, she managed to break the glass and the teenagers just fell out of the car. They quickly gathered themselves and began to flee. Everyone was running as fast as they could, not thinking about what was in front of them. Behind him, Park Min was in no hurry looking back at the car. The monster swallowed her whole. Out of the corner of her eye, Soyon noticed that her classmate had stopped and was not running away. She stopped and called out to Park Min, who was holding a Molotov cocktail. The girl asked him what he was doing and told him to run away immediately because it was dangerous. Park said he would leave soon. Cold sweat was pouring down the teenager's face. He mumbled something about having to kill the animals, and then he set fire to the cocktail, commenting that the monsters were afraid of fire, so he would burn them. Yeonwoo noticed that So-young wasn't running and was dealing with Park Min. He called out to the girl and stopped, but she was running after Park Min. She ran to her classmate and asked what he was doing. Seo-young wanted to stop Park Min, but she didn't have time. Park Min threw a Molotov cocktail at the monster. Then there was a loud sound and an explosion, because there was gas in the car and there was more fire than expected. Black smoke and fire rose into the sky. The teenagers gasped loudly. They fell to the ground from the shockwave. No one had time to realize what had happened, because everything happened too fast. Yeon-woo came back to see what had happened and was shocked. The monster seemed indifferent to such a huge explosion. The teenagers realized that he had not died, even though the gas had exploded. Suddenly, someone's hand touched Soyon's shoulder. It was Yeon-woo, who ordered the girl to get up and run away. But the guy didn't finish because he noticed something. Park Min was lying on the road, not moving. The teenager was the closest to the explosion. Yeon-woo called him, but his classmate was silent, his body trembling. Seo-young told Yeon-woo about it and asked him to help her because Park Min was in trouble. But the teenager rejected Soyon, which left the girl in a stupor. She returned, and Yeon-woo said that he was not here to save Park Min. And then he simply turned around and ordered Soyon to quickly follow him. But the girl stood her ground and asked what Yeon-woo was talking about. She said that he shouldn't have done that and abandoned Park Min because Seo-young could have been in his place. Kang Ji-hoon ran to his classmates and asked how they felt. But suddenly he stopped and overheard a conversation between Yeon-woo and Soyon. He asked the girl if Park Min would have gone to save her, adding that such a bastard was not capable of such a thing. And then he said that he was here for his parents and did not care what would happen to him or to Lee Hong-mi. Kang Ji-hoon heard this, and he asked if Yeon-woo didn't care about Han-mi. The teenager was very angry. He said that Yeon-woo was acting selfishly. The guy said that even if he did, Kang Ji-hoon didn't understand what he was feeling right now. Then Soyon interrupted the conversation, and Yeon-woo looked at the girl. She said that otherwise, if he did not help his classmates, he would help his parents. And then Soyoung paused and asked why Yeon-woo was still here. Meanwhile, the blogger ran away as fast as he could. He didn't listen to the teenager's arguments and just ran for his life. Suddenly, he stopped because he saw something terrible. In front of him was an overturned truck and another abandoned car. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon told Yeon-woo to go and look for his parents, calling him a bastard. The teenager was very angry and offended, turned around and said that no matter what happened to Yeon-woo, he would not help him. Suddenly, the guy felt pain in his arm, and this spoke of only one thing. Then Yeon-woo heard the monster growling. He shouted and told his classmates what he had realized. Sung-yeon and Kang Ji-hoon started running away at once, the girl screaming that the monster had woken up again. The monster's roar became louder and louder. Kang Ji-hoon cursed as a feeling of danger and fear gripped his body again. No one expected the monster to wake up, because everyone hoped that the explosion had killed it. Suddenly, Yeon-woo realized something about the feeling of fear. The thought hit him like a bolt from the blue. At that moment, the blogger shouted excitedly to the teenager and told him to guess what he had found. There was a weapon hanging on the boy's back. He took it in his hands and raised it to show it off to the others. But he didn't finish. The blogger fell silent because the monster rose and growled. Then Kang Ji-hoon approached him, stretched out his hand and ordered him to give him the weapon. The blogger didn't even have time to object and simply asked what the teenager was planning to do. Meanwhile, the giant monster roared and was about to attack the unfortunate children again. Kang Ji-hoon opened fire and ran screaming at the ugly monster. He thought to himself that he simply had to destroy them. After all, the monster was very slow, and this was their advantage. Kang Ji-hoon opened fire on the giant. At this point, the monster also began to be hit by bullets from gunfire. It was a blogger. He was aiming at a monster, and behind him was Park Choa running with a Molotov cocktail. The blogger shouted that he had to take revenge on these monsters for his friend, whom they had just eaten. Meanwhile, Soyon ran up to Park Min and tried to let her classmate down. She was screaming and sincerely worried about the teenager. Seo-young asked if he heard her, tried to somehow bring Park Min back to consciousness. Yeon-woo was watching. He was thinking about something, but he was in no hurry to act, as if he was hesitating in his decisions. Meanwhile, Park Choa swung a Molotov cocktail at the monster, screaming. The giant, ugly monster kept burning and smoking, but still did not die. The teenagers made every effort to defeat the evil.